right? We have to answer everything. We have to tell exactly what our opinions and how those opinions are supported, the facts behind the case, any opinions we make, all that is subject to extreme scrutiny in court. Um, and yeah, you are right. There's two parts to this. One that we worked on. One was the social media stuff, and the other is the cell phone evidence. And the defense cell phone expert is not correct. He's actually incorrect in a lot of areas, and I know this. The FBI's training school called Cellular Analysis Survey Team, their instructors are my business partners in another business. We know very well what's truth and what's not, and what you have is you have an industry of experts, so-called claimed experts that are not engineers. They have no experience. They've read this stuff out of a book. They've never went out in the field and actually taken radio frequency measurements or tested cell phone towers, and they're up there in court testifying. And
Mhm.
the individual they hired, unbeknownst to them probably, the software that he created has been daubered and others thrown out of court numerous times. They considered it unscientific. They considered it complete guesswork.
I
And
did find one instance of that. Again, I told you, my attorney friend, he actually spoke about it on his YouTube channel. I think it was out of Colorado. I did find one instance of that, and we spoke about that, but that's the only one that we could find. And it makes people feel like there's so much credibility behind the expert.
no, we in the industry do not use that software. The FBI quit using that software. Everybody did. It is well known in our industry. Don't use that X. Matter of fact, I have testimony from FBI officers saying they don't use it because it's not proper. And I can show you why, because I can explain all the theories behind what ZX does and why it's absolutely nonsense. And matter of fact, in an hour from now, I have one of the most leading experts for the intelligence community going to meet me here in my office. We're going through some stuff in another murder case, but we do things the right way. We don't get the luxury of being wrong. I mean, I have cell engineers on staff. My one cell engineer on staff is the guy who developed the technology that found Bin Laden. So we have absolute true engineers. The other two business partners I have are the head of the Wireless Information Center of Excellence for all 13 carriers. They have over 100 patents in their name. They have a PhD. They teach wireless engineering. They help write the 3GPP standards for the industry. They do drive testing for the FBI, and the FBI's actual Gladiator autonomous receiver. That's the tool they use in the field to do drive testing, tech cell
Mhm.
phone networks. They are the owners and designers of that product. So
I love that.
without
We've
a
heard
doubt,
about
like,
that in court. Yep, we've
yeah,
heard about the
I have
Gladiator.
real experts here. They're, that what you're hearing in court is individuals that have attended the school that are taught by my business partners. And we own a school called 702 Cellular Academy where we teach this stuff. There's only a few lawyers that have ever been to that. It is a hardcore engineering school. It's a complete graduate program, condensed into a couple weeks. And the one attorney that did attend it that's been doing well is Raven Liberty, who's been working on the YNW Melly case. We've been
Mhm.
working with her for the past about 2 years. We've been consulting on that case on a daily basis. She attended the actual school, graduated, got certified. She's got her CCTE, um, and she has been using that. And you can see what the results of that are. Now you have the FBI trying to impeach the state trying to impeach the FBI, and the judge throwing his hands up, going, you know,
Mhm.
government, you can't have it both ways, right? You can't have it both ways. Either somebody's got to be right here, and we're saying all this evidence needs to be thrown out. And so far, we've been doing very well in that case.
Okay. All right. I like that for you. And I actually kept up with the YNWMLE through another YouTube channel. I heard about the case and I've been absolutely, so I've seen Raven and so I'm familiar.
Yeah, we do a lot of work with Raven and a lot of her cases. Same thing with Kathleen Zellner, who did Making a Murderer. We're working on the Stephen Avery case. Working on lots of cases of her. We just testified in the Melissa Kalazinski clemency hearing a couple weeks ago. I was in Illinois testifying for that. That case is going to be air on 48 hours again this fall time. They were filming us a couple weeks ago, so we're pretty active in a lot of very high profile cases. And a lot of times people don't hear about us because, the attorneys kind of hold their powder in their keg to the last minute, right? And then we show up at trial and they don't realize we've been part of the case for 2, 3 years, right? Because you don't disclose experts till the very end. They don't
Yeah.
have to know.
Yeah.
Some states require early disclosure, but in most cases they don't.
Okay. So you have a lot of experience, and so does your staff as well. And you have patents, and your programming is all admissible. It's been tested, all those great things. So let's move forward. Because those were a lot of my, like, most of my first questions, actually, that you just knocked out.
Well, when you talk about like how do you vet something, like when it comes to experts, unfortunately I'm in the world of kind of like the wild wild west, right? We don't have a non-vendor, in other words, a vendor neutral association per se. You have law enforcement associations, and you have one that recently converted into a little bit of non-law enforcement because they're running out of money. But typically what you have is you have experts that get certified in the use of a product, but the real test of your skills is in court. The judge allows both parties to put their experts forward. They both sometimes don't agree to certain things. Most of the time, 80, 85% of what they say they agree to. Both the prosecution and the defense experts say yes to many questions, and they're pretty much the same. Then about 15% they say, no, you're wrong, right? And that's when the battle comes in. And the judge is the gatekeeper. They get to decide whether you're an expert or not. So there are processes used to determine whether somebody's an expert, and that is through what's called Dauber or Fry hearings. It's where you get to test the expert and say, are they actually an expert? And in my industry, there are a lot of individuals that say they're experts and they can go to court and the court will agree that they're an expert and they let the juries kind of sort it out. But you would probably agree with me if you've seen underneath their CV that they're not an expert, right? Just because you mowed the lawn once doesn't make you a lawn maintenance expert, right? So you see a lot of that in our industry, and there's a reason why. Um, if the prosecution's expert is really bad, right, and they have just a little bit of training, we want them on the witness stand. Why wouldn't we tender them as your expert? Please put them up there. So we'll crucify them, right? Well, absolutely. So a lot of times people get vetted as experts just because nobody wants to challenge them. It's just to get them on the witness stand to challenge them on the witness stand. Because if you get them thrown out, they may get replaced with somebody that's better, right? So you want the bad person on the witness stand. That's kind of trial
Right.
strategy, right? It's just
Right.
trial strategy stuff. But yes, we've testified. I personally testified 321 times in 49 states. So I testified a lot in a lot of trials. Our case history, I worked um, on Rudy Giuliani's case. I have the election rigging case in Wisconsin. I had 3 of the J6 cases. I have Trump's lawyer, Catherine Freeze. I had advised on R. Kelly's case. We worked on advised on Julian Assange's case. We did. Let's see here. Gerard Butler, the movie star. Like every week it's somebody new. It's something different. But each one of those cases are not necessarily like criminal cases or civil cases. People suing each other in money and properties like that. But yeah, most of my staff have testified numerous times in court, usually per month, usually 2 to 3 times a month. They're on the witness stand and they get tested heavily, and especially cases where we're up against the intelligence community, where we have cases where the CIA is the defendant, and they bring the best of the best, right? That's their job. So they hire the best firm they can, they hire the best people they can, they bring their own internal people, and it becomes a battle of the experts. But the judge gets to decide, who's the expert. But I'd say, yeah, I have some very, very qualified individuals that work here. So,
As I assumed. And I just wanted to make that clear because we actually are recording. So when I go ahead and edit this, I want to make sure that everyone knows that yourself, your company, the tech that you use, what you produce as outcomes, it's all valid. So that's why I asked those questions, because I've said it And then they're like, well, you don't know him. You don't know their company and you don't know what they have a history of. You don't know their reputation. And they're like, he's a big tech guy. He could be paying to have things stowed away that we don't know about. So I just wanted everyone to hear from your own mouth that everyone at your business is actually on the up and up. And when you say something, it is probably very much to be believed.
Yeah,
So,
it is a little weird because we work, like for instance, we were working on for Giuliani, like the plaintiff's case against Giuliani. We're also working on the election rigging case that was against Trump. And then at the same time, we were working on Trump's attorney defending her. Like we work both sides. It doesn't matter. We work, there's cases where I work for the Department of Justice in the prosecution side of something. At the same time, we're working on the defense of something else. We don't get the luxury of picking and choosing our clients. Like they pick us. And it's a weird thing. It's kind of like this. There's no bias in the DNA results, right? You don't take somebody that processes DNA and they say that's the person, that's the person who matches the DNA. Um, you don't take them to court and say, well, they can't work for the defense and they can't work for the prosecution. They got to choose sides. Well, if we did that, that would be inherently biased, right? We operate like scientists. We analyze evidence, we write reports, and we testify in court about them. Do we get hired more by the defense? Yes, that's because the prosecution has their own forensic laboratories. They have their own, processing centers. They have the regional computer forensic labs. They have Quantico, and they spent all this money building those resources internally so they don't have to go out and contract somebody at the last minute. Because of that, of course, you're going to work more defense cases when it comes to criminal than you are for the prosecution. So the prosecution reaches out when they hit a brick wall, right? They can't do something, they don't have a specific capability. They'll call and they'll say, I need help. Like audio video is something that is not a big industry. So there's very few of us doing audio video forensics. So when we get the phone call and say, can you do this audio file? It's because they don't have any audio people there. That's the law enforcement just inherently doesn't have a ton. I think in all law enforcement across the United States, there's only a couple dozen people doing audio forensics.
that's amazing.
Besides, there's
That's
a lot of people that just click on a button on a program, right? And they
right.
get this
Yeah.
result.
Yeah.
Besides button pushers, true audio forensic experts, there's only a couple dozen.
That's amazing.
So,
That's amazing.
so it makes it difficult for them. So that's why sometimes they reach out for those capabilities. Otherwise, we
So
work for both sides.
I want to ask you a question based on the things that you just said. The prosecution reaching out versus the defense reaching out. So let's start with, I want to make it clear for viewers. To begin with, you were reached out to by the defense, correct? In
Correct.
in the state of Idaho versus Coburger. Okay. Now, what you said you did look at was the social media, right?
Well, no. At first, they were consulting with us about the cell phone location information, and we just taking upon ourselves, we just ran the social media because actually it was kind of interesting. We were doing internal training in our office, right? So we're like, let's put in Brian Koberger in the social media system and we'll spit out a report and see what relates to what. When we did, we found the connections between the two. And this was really early on. This was right, I think maybe a week after his name even came up. I think before that, and you'll have to excuse me. I don't really follow these cases, right? To you, I know that this is kind of like something I'm very interested in, clearly passionate about, but we have 570 open cases, and even though it's sexy in the news, it is not sexy in our office. We have cases where we have cartel and 1,500 kilos of coke on a boat and people murdering children and chopping them up into pieces. I mean, stuff that the news doesn't want to cover because it's too
Mhm.
much for people to handle.
I
So,
absolutely
in the
understand.
big grand scheme of things, this was like just another day of business in our office, right? So we ran Mr. Koberger's background check first. So we run a GBLA, GPPA, and NCIC background check, and then we use Clear as well, the same as the airports. We have access to Clear. So we run the background check so we can pull emails that was used to apply for credit cards. So we know we have the right email, right? When you're applying for a credit card and they give you a credit card, you most likely have the right email, right? and it
Okay.
gives you confidence ratings in the system. So it'll tell you this email address has been used, 25 times to apply for credit or a phone, or you get a phone from Verizon Wireless and you've used that email address. All that is recorded into what you call your credit header profile. We pulled the credit header profile first, just phone numbers, emails, aliases, all that stuff, and then we loaded it, right? We loaded into our system. And then we were looking for the social media because at the same time, we also got contacted by Inside Edition,
Mhm.
which contacts us often to work on stuff. And they says, hey, can you take a look at this video file from this? They call it the mac and cheese truck, right?
Yeah.
We need that enhanced. How fast can you do it? And they usually call us like at 2 o'clock and ask us to have it done by 3, right? I think it was like 60 minutes because they have to go on air really quick. So things are fast. And we sometimes we tell them no, sometimes we just don't have time to do it. Sometimes if we have a little time, we'll take an hour or two of our time and we'll do it for them. But you can't be compensated by them. That it's their news. They're not allowed to pay for that type of stuff. Um so we were doing the audio video of the mac and cheese truck for Inside Edition. So we said, now let's just run this through our social media system and see what comes out. And we did. And then what we found, I thought was pretty important because I had at least caught enough news that a bunch of individuals are saying they didn't know how they were related and it was just random. And I said, well, I'm looking at some data that shows that it's not random. They knew each other, right? Enough that they were connected via, I think it was Instagram. And so we decided not to work with with the defense. We
So
decided it's probably not in our best interest.
that
Very
was
high
something
profile case. I don't think it was going to be solved very quickly. I said this is just going to be a nightmare right now. I said we'll just wait till the dust settles and then we'll make a decision later. So we
that was
decided
something that I
to withdraw.
assumed, to be honest with you. I study forensic psychology. I know what, an expert witness has the right to do and not do, and I know that you have the right to take a look and say that you think you want to help and then retract that later because of the fact that you may find something that you're like, this is awful, you know? And I assumed that maybe that was what happened, that perhaps in the aftermath, you looked and found the social media connection and decided, pardon me, to no longer be involved. So I'm glad that we crossed that bridge because it was
I,
sort of a thing that I did. I kind of thought that maybe that
it
you,
wasn't. Our decision wasn't based on the social media data. It was financial because this is Moscow, Idaho. They don't have like a huge
yeah,
budget over there, right?
yeah,
Public defense offices typically their case budget is $3,000 for a case. You can't get off the ground in this case for $3,000 because this is going to
yeah.
be an absolute nightmare of a case, right? And then you're working for. So here's what happens: the defense attorney has to file an ex parte motion to appoint a forensic expert, right? And that means the prosecutor doesn't know that. They don't get notice of it. They don't know who it is. They don't know anything. It's all super secret and quiet. Then they either shop for experts afterwards. They already have somebody in mind ahead of time. They've already spoken to. And then what they do is they have to file the ex parte order for a motion to appoint funds. So they have to get money.
Mhm.
Usually the judge will give them $3,000 to $5,000, and that's it. That's it. Well, as an expert, if you sign on board with something, let's say you start on the case. Now, this case is got a lot of eyes and ears on it, right? This is not one of those cases that just will disappear quickly and there'll be some kind of plea deal or something like that, right?
Mhm.
It's not going to happen.
Mhm.
So the fear always is for us experts is you take a case, you do some advisement, you get your $5,000, and then you decide, hey, there's nothing I can bring of value to this case, or you just resign. You're like, I don't want to work on it anymore, right? But then the prosecutor subpoenas you to 15 times in court afterwards to all these things just to be nasty, and you have to show up. And
And
if
it's
you've
crazy.
resigned your position, you very well may be in the position that the judge says, because you originally agreed to this, you've submitted yourself to jurisdiction. Therefore, they have a right to make you, like me, fly from Florida to Idaho to go to court on my dime, right?
Mhm,
I have to pay for it now.
mhm,
So you can go broke real quick and stuff like this. So you have to be very careful. Either they have a budget to do this and they can protect you, or if you think the defense is not strong enough to be able to handle those things. And you can get that feeling from talking to them, right? Whether you think they have the grit and tenacity to take on the judge and say, Judge, you're not going to have my expert fly from Florida at no cost. But they can't say that if you resign. It's not their expert. They say you can't have Mr. Garrett fly because he used to work for us, and the judge says I have jurisdiction over him. I could surely.
mhm,
He submitted
mhm.
himself in the state under jurisdiction. I can make him fly here. So that is one of the fears. That's why you see some experts are like, yeah, they don't want involved in stuff like this, because if the prosecutor wants to get nasty, they can get real nasty. They can make you fly across the nation 15 times and show up to all these hearings in which they don't even call you in. They make you come sit in
Yes,
the hallway. They don't call you.
and
You're
we
there
have
for
seen that.
nothing. And then let's say it's a 5 day hearing. You're getting called. They want you there day one. You're there 4.5 days before they call you at the end and go, "What's your name? What did you do?" "Oh, okay. We don't need them no more, Judge." They send you packing and you were there 5 days for nothing.
Mhm. I totally
And that just
understand.
happened 2 weeks ago. I had a trial where they called me. I was there for 7 days, and in which they didn't even call me at the end because they got the defendant to admit to
Right.
everything I wrote in my report. So therefore, they don't need to put witness stand. But I'm there to keep them on their toes, right? And I'm getting
Yeah,
paid sit in the conference room and wait till I get called. And if they would have lied, they would have called me on the witness stand. But unfortunately, the good thing was the defendant told the truth, so they didn't need me. But that happens. But that's why, sometimes we're like, yeah, that case is not worth it, right? If it was private party movie star, you know, and they had unlimited net worth, right? You would say, yeah, sure, they'll just send them a bill, right? And it's fine. And then we do a lot of public defense work. We probably work 200 cases at public defense. But when it's super high profile like this, unfortunately, because it's charged by the state and not the feds, the budget is going to be very small. The state has really low budgets. Federal government is different. They'll give you $20,000 just for a case to start, and you can work with
I
20 grand.
understand.
It gets you a couple hours on the board. A state case with a $3,000 budget like this, you're not going to get through reading the discovery in
Right,
$3,000. It's
right.
just
I
thousands
I
of
totally
pages.
get it now.
So it was
Totally
a
un
financial decision. And then, it wasn't like whether we thought he had a good case or not. But clearly, when we saw the report about the cell phone evidence, we all kind of chuckled. We go, that's not right. None of that's right. It just doesn't make sense.
So now when you're looking at these things, are they providing you raw data? Is it a forensic download of the device? Are you looking at the actual device? Are you just looking what are you actually viewing to create what you do?
Well, most cases start with a case review. And when I say that, what that means is we get all the paper discovery to start with. And then we know from the paper discovery what they have in evidence, like what we work in the world of digital data, right? So I'm looking for, evidence like cell phones, computers, GPS trackers on vehicles, that kind of stuff, audio recorders. Um, and we look at that. Then we look at what do we actually need to go look at? Because sometimes they clear a device and say there's no evidentiary value in it. Well, that's for them, but that may be evidentiary value for us because it may build an alibi defense, right? So if law enforcement has two devices in, let's use an example, if they have two devices um, in evidence, one is a Garmin GPS tracker and another one's a cell phone, and their report they wrote says we're estimating the cell phone coverage to be within 4 square miles of the crime scene. Well, I want to look at the GPS tracker, right? Because that thing's probably super accurate and get you precision down to like 1 square meter. But sometimes you'll see law enforcement says, well, we're only charging you with the crime that has to do with this device right here. and totally ignore the rest of the evidence that could build the alibi defense. So we decide and we write a letter that says, this is the discovery you're missing. And here's our next steps. This is what we need to do. We need to go look at this evidence. And sometimes the evidence we have to go to the law enforcement center to analyze. We have portable equipment that goes out in the field. We have a bunch of equipment that goes on planes, and we take it with us. It's cases of computing equipment, and then sometimes they send it to our office. They pack it up, so we get it like, cover the name. We get a box like this in it, and it has, an S. This one has an SD card in it. This is evidence in a case. Sometimes it's hard drives. Sometimes it's actual like Garmin device or the cell phone itself. They'll send to us. But law enforcement typically doesn't let original evidence leave their lab. They send us a copy, but we know whether that copy is correct or not. There's forensic tools have authentication methods in them, and you can tell whether something's been altered or changed.
Okay. Okay. So that was a good one. Let's see if I have any other questions based on that before I move on my list. So when you looked at the cell phone location data for this, did you go to the lab to look at to do like with your portable, or did you get was that
No,
just a paper documentation?
they didn't either. They're using billing records from
Oh,
like your cell carrier. So the same thing, like if you have Verizon Wireless or AT&T and you go out and print your bill and it shows all the phone calls you made, there's a type of billing record called a CDR. It's called call detail record. Now you as a consumer actually have access to this. If you go in right now and log in, there's an area you can go to in there that actually shows your CDR. That is not normally what most people go do because it's buried down in your kind of like customer support portal, and it adds a couple different things to a typical cell phone bill. So, a typical cell phone bill, you'll get the person you called, whether the call's outbound or incoming, the two parties that are involved, the two phone numbers, right? And then what it'll give you in these CDRs, which is interesting, is the actual cell antenna that was used. Now, not cell tower. Towers have multiple antennas on them, but the actual antenna that was being used and the azimuth of that. That means which direction it's pointing, but that doesn't mean that's where the radio signal goes. Just means that's the direction the antenna is pointing. So in a typical cell phone tower, let's say, and there's 3, 4, 6, and 8 sector towers, but let's take a three sector tower, you would have three antennas, one pointing, let's say 90 degrees, one pointing like, possibly 270 and 300. So they're not exactly aligned perfectly. It depends on if you're on the edge of a town, you want all the coverage to go one direction. You may have two of them pointing to the west and one pointing to the south, and there's none pointing to the east. So they're not exactly always 360. In most cases, they try to build it 360. So it will tell you those things in a CDR, but it does not tell you the GPS location of the phone. That's often confused with what people call in the industry pings. Um, that is a term that is typically reserved for when you queried the phone remotely and it answered back to the cell network as to the location of the phone. That is like an E911 service. That has to happen live at the time of the incident. So because nobody knows this crime was being committed, then nobody's pinging the phone at that time. What they're seeing is billing records, and
okay.
what law enforcement does is they take those billing records and they try to estimate cellular coverage from that, but their methodologies are horribly flawed, like beyond flawed. They're so flawed that the IEEE put out a white paper stating that none of what they're doing is supported by any engineering science whatsoever. And I teach at a school along with a couple of professors and David Burgess the right way to do this, because the way that is being used in court of the last decade is just nonsense. Like it doesn't even make sense at all. It's so far from reality. And it the problem was you had a couple officers that learned how to do something, they adulterated it, and then they went and taught everybody in the US the same thing. And then you have a bunch of defense experts that went to the same school when they were a cop.
Mhm.
So now you have cops teaching cops bad science, and it becomes like the de facto standard of bad science. And I'm out here telling them, hey, the world's round, and they're saying it's flat still. And I'm just kind of chuckling, like, I will embarrass you in court badly, right? Because so far, like this year, I think we had about 16 cases where they completely removed the cell phone evidence from. And I actually had one of the state's experts resign her position in the middle of a deposition
Oh my gosh.
because it's like learning, it's like being a Christian and learning Christianity's false, right? You know, it's their religion. They do this every day, and then when they get confronted and somebody hands them a textbook this thick from a college and says, look at page 200, that looks nothing like what you're drawing. That is nothing like it. And they're reading it for the first time. They're like, well, I went to this 2-day school and how to plot dots on a map and draw arrows. I go, that's great. You're an Excel magician, but that doesn't make you an engineer. It's like, so that's kind of what's going on in the industry, and that's why ZX got in trouble. They drew these little funny blobs on there and said this is a cell phone coverage.
I was literally going to ask you about the wedge versus the amoeba that he's talking about. Like he's like, well,
Neither
it's
one of those
really
are correct.
amoeba formation.
Neither one. So I can actually show you what it should look like, because and here I'll do so. There's okay. Let's get into this. There are industry approved ways of doing this. This is what the cell carriers do every day. So back in the day, you used to see all the antennas on the back of the minivan that drove around. It said Verizon Wireless on it, and they tested the network. Right? Those days are over. They actually use your cell phone to test their own network. They use it like they're spying on your phone's radio signals. So your phone has what's called MDT, minimization of drive test, which
I was just
means
going to ask you, so is that how they do drive tests? Because I literally thought that it was like the same way as back in the day. So everywhere I go, I'm
no,
technically drive testing.
no, we drive test, yes, with vehicles and equipment. And I have that equipment here. We go out and actually put the antennas on the vehicle and go drive test, right? That's to test the actual cell phone coverage. Okay. But the cell carrier can also do this without that. They can query your phone as to the location of your phone and the radio signal strength to multiple antennas. But that data is not kept around very long, usually 2 days. Okay. That is because it just monitors and tries to help the health of the network. Let me
That's
here.
interesting.
I will
That is
share my
very
screen
interesting.
with you. I think I can. Can I present? Yeah, I can
I
present.
believe so.
All right. Let me. Okay. You can take a look here. Can you see that?
Oh, I don't
Maybe.
think I can.
Let's go here. Let's see here.
Oh, I got to add it. That's all. There you go. Now I can.
There you go. See that thing right there?
Yep.
That's one cell phone tower. That is not 120 degrees. That's not the triangle. If I was to draw the 120 on here, here would be the beginning of it. It would look like this, right? That would be my 120. See the orange area? That is where you
Mhm.
can make a phone call. And you're
Okay.
probably like, why can you make a phone call the opposite way of the tower? And I'll explain to you why.
Okay.
So, wait a second. There are in cell phone towers, antennas do not broadcast in a nice triangle. We all wish they did. That's not the way it works. So you have what's called a main lobe, side lobes, and back lobes. That's what cell phone coverage really looks like. Okay.
Okay.
One antenna, not cell tower, one antenna on top of the tower. There's three of them. If you want
Okay.
to know where they're getting the 120 degrees from, see that part right there?
Yes.
That's the main lobe. That is not the total coverage. That is the best coverage area.
Okay.
That means if the victim's house is right here and the perpetrator's house right here, you could very well be sitting on your own couch at home, and at the same time, the cell coverage says you're at the crime scene.
Okay.
Now, the distance on a 4G antenna, theoretically, okay, let's not talk about terrain, environmental factors, height of the antenna, all that. 23 miles.
Okay.
So the antenna covering the crime scene could very well cover Brian Koberger's home.
Own home.
Could be
Yep.
sitting at the couch. Okay.
Okay.
Second of all, the width. Okay. You could be looking at 12 miles. So you're talking about a massive area, right? So, and then you say, well, what about the backside? Here, three backside. There's backside lobes. You could actually be the opposite direction of the cell tower.
Like approaching it or
You could
moving
be
away from it.
you could be anywhere within the backside. So the tower could be facing north. You could be actually south by a mile and still connected to the tower north.
Okay.
So here's what happens.
That makes sense. Okay. That makes sense with what I've been hearing in court too. Got it. Okay.
So here's what happens. You got a cell tower, right? You got the cell tower here, and you got a cell tower here, and you got a cell tower here, right? You could actually be right here heading this direction and be on this tower here. You connected to that tower, right? Hypothetically. And as you move towards here, you don't even connect to this one. It connects you to this one while you're heading that direction.
Interesting.
Because cell phone networks are multi-layered. That means you have cell towers that cover boomer cells that can cover a whole city. You have layered, and then you have to take it by band. Every phone call is made on a specific frequency. You take a cell phone here, right here, this cell phone right here, and you look at the box that it came in, and it says it has 3 frequencies it operates on. Let's use Sprint, for example, 700 megahertz, 2100, 2300, okay? Let me give you a good example. When somebody drives by your house and you hear the bass and it's boom, 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 and your walls are shaking, that's because it's low frequencies. Travels really far, has lots of power, penetrates buildings. High frequencies, the tweeter, the hi-hat, that kind of stuff, do not go through buildings. They don't go very far. So the lower frequency you're on, the further away the tower you could be, the higher the frequency, the closer you have to be. So frequency makes a huge difference in these cases, but what they did is totally ignored that. They just left it off, but they had access to it. They have access to it because it comes on the CDR and they can match it up against the capabilities of the cell tower and they would be able to estimate coverage, how far out from the cell phone tower you can be. Okay. Then on top of that, you have to use, let me show you here. Sorry, I'm taking screenshots from another case that we were just working on. I'm showing you on screen.
That's
So
okay.
no big deal. Let's see
Take time.
here.
I'm learning so much. And I thought I
So
knew what a cell phone tower did. Like, I'm learning so much.
it's very cute. Okay, here you go. If you can share that, I'll show you.
Mm-hmm.
This is call detail records at the bottom. And you notice how it says band 13 channel frequency. There it's operating a 751 megahertz right there. Great.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yep.
right here. That's the difference. And this is kind of a network density map showing all the towers and how they're located. And it gives you an idea of the density of cell phone coverage. So you can see if you're in the red section out there, you're probably not going to get a phone call.
Okay.
It's the middle of the Everglades, I think, down there, conservation area. You're not getting the phone call because it's dead. They don't have any radio signal. But anywhere in the orange, yellow, green, and blue, you're going to get a phone call. The blue's the best, and then as it goes out to green, it's a little worse, and then yellow gets okay, and then orange is pretty sketchy coverage, right?
Okay.
So, and that's the way we build these maps out. And basically, the way this works is this: if you don't know what frequency you're operating on, you don't know how far from the antenna you can be. Okay, number one. Number two, cell antennas don't broadcast 120 degrees. And ZX's little crazy amoeba they put on screen is just complete nonsense and made up. If anything, cell coverage looks more like ectoplasma from Ghostbusters on a wall. It is all over the place. It is scattered, and there's big, giant, huge section way out in the left. Here is those images you're looking at actually are from a murder case involving some individuals down in Florida where they're blaming Kodak Black
Yeah.
for
Yep.
ordering the hit. That's
Yep.
his case. That's what we're working on. And we actually have the defendants 21 miles from the crime scene at the time of the crime.
Oh my
They're
god.
nowhere even near the crime.
Oh my
So
god.
they clearly didn't commit the crime. Man, I'm not saying they didn't know about it, but they
But
surely didn't commit
they
the
didn't
crime.
do it at
No,
minimum.
they
Yeah.
didn't do it. And so what happens is if you know the frequency, you know how far you could be. Okay, what theoretically. And then when it comes to Koberger's case, what's interesting is they showed him driving south down the mountain and coming back up, right, around the mountain. That's impossible. You know why? Because there's no cell phone towers there in the bottom. None at all. There's zero measurements. They just made it up because they said we have a point here and a point here. And we think based on driving speed, you drove from here to here. It's not necessarily true. According to people, maybe he was hiking and he connected to one tower and connected to the other tower. You're on the edge of the mountain, which explains why you can connect to one and then connect to the other and not even be in a car, right?
Yeah.
And that is very problematic for the prosecution because the science that they use is not science, it's junk. It's made up. It's completely made up. These 120-degree pi wedges are not supported in any engineering science. The IEEE says it isn't. Real cell engineers don't do things that way. They use what's called the Longley Rice model, and they do what's called RF propagation models. Now, you say, how close are those? They've been tested. Universities have tested this. They use this in the field every single day to estimate coverage. All cell carriers do, and they were within 3% of reality. That's how perfect their measurements are. I mean, to give you an idea, in Memphis, Tennessee, there are 299,244 cell towers. I know that because we just worked a case there. That is a lot of cell towers. Their cell towers are in buildings, strapped to the side of a building, big, huge metal structures. You know, there's cell towers all over the place. They aren't just necessarily big physical towers. Okay. Out of those towers, you know how many have a coverage of 120 degrees? 12. Sorry, 12. That's it. So using 120 degrees is an exception, not the rule.
Okay. That makes sense.
So what they've done is they've thrown some data on a nice pretty map to sell a judge the idea that they could get a search warrant. That's what they do. But the individuals that do this, they don't know the difference. They've been told this, they've been trained this way, they've been taught this way. So let me give you a little peek.
I also heard that on stand from the individual who put the PCA together. So that makes perfect sense. He has already openly admitted that he didn't know what he was doing there and that he did it based upon someone else's instruction. Mm-hmm.
Always they hang, but so the testimony usually goes like this. I went to a school and they taught me this in the school. What's your scientific basis behind it? The school I went to. Who's your instructor? I don't know. Where did you take the class at? I don't remember what city it is. Do you have any materials from the class? No, I don't. Do you have any independent research you've done after the fact? No. Has anybody told you otherwise? No. Is this commonly used in the industry? Yes. It's used by 6,000 law enforcement centers across the United States in the same methodologies. Yet any universities peer review this? No. Like it's like you're fighting a black box, but the judge goes, "We'll just let the jury work it out." The jury's not smart enough to work this out. This is complex stuff, right? You know, so let me show you past. So let's see here. Let me share my screen, and I'm going to show you something interesting. So the FBI puts out a book. It's called this Cast Field Resource Guide. This is for their officers, right? And let's see here. Here we go. If you want to publish that, I'll show you. So here's the field resource guide for the FBI. Okay. What's interesting is, let me go through this. This is kind of like their little training book on CAST. And they talk about CAST viz. Okay. You take call detail records plus the tower list. The tower list is where the physical structure of the tower is located at, longitude, latitude.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And notice this little parameters by all sectors down here at the bottom, this little section right here. They get to
Yep.
choose 60, 90, 120, or 360 degrees and how far out it broadcasts. They just click a button. They don't even
Okay.
know.
Okay.
Like
That makes sense.
they just click a button. Like, and here's a historical CDR. And then let's take a look here. Now take a look at this. This is what's interesting. what you're seeing here, right here, is the typical 120-degree, and I don't think I can annotate on here, but this 120-degree pie-shaped wedge over here,
Yep.
right? Okay.
Yep.
That's what you see in all their maps. But on the left here, if you take a look at that little black dot there to the left of that red arrow, if
Yep.
you drew the 120-degree cone there, you're probably like, why is there green lines to the left, to the backside, outside of this 120-degree cone? Let me tell you why. They drove test that area, and they could still make phone calls on that cell tower, even
Okay.
in the opposite direction of the tower, because they're on the rear lobes. This is the FBI's own training book saying so. And I've also put tons of FBI officers on the witness stand and asked them the same exact thing. And they say, yeah, you can connect to the backside of the tower, and they hem haul around. Then you have these rules that say is general rule of thumb, a tower's range can be depicted by 70% of the distance to the next neighboring tower. That is nonsense because they're multi-layered. One tower could be underneath of another tower. And then you have downward tilt on antennas too, which changes mechanical and manual downward tilt, which changes the coverage pattern on the ground. Also, general rule of thumb is you'll get Dauberton for that. That is not allowed in court. We have to know for sure. We have to give a scientific opinion. There's no such thing as general rule of thumb for court. There's actually law that says you can't use general rule of thumb evidence. Great.
Okay. That makes sense.
And you'll see stuff like, give me a second here. I think you'll find this interesting. It doesn't have to do with this case, but it definitely has to do with another. See this letter from AT&T to the FBI about Nilos saying
Mhm.
don't use it. It's not correct. But they still use it in their court cases. This is literally an email as part of their training guide saying, do not use this data, but they're still using it in court cases to put people in prison.
Okay. Are we sure that
Just,
this doesn't apply in the Koberger case?
they didn't have Nilos records.
Okay.
Nilos are a very specific type of record right up here. Um, and this is what you call ranging data. Ranging data is called OTDOA, observed time domain, time difference of arrival. I'm used to using time domain reflectrometry, which is electrical engineering terms, but OTDOA has to do with I go to the Grand Canyon, I yell Andrew Garrett, and I hear it go Andrew Garrett, and it comes back to me as an echo. Right, that is the distance it took for my signal, my voice to hit the other side of the Grand Canyon and bounce
And
back.
bounce back to you. Okay.
Then you know when you're a kid, your parents told you when you hear lightning, count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and hit 10. That means it's 10 miles away. Right.
Mhm.
That's exactly what's going on. They're sending a signal out to the phone, they're bouncing it off the phone, and they're measuring the time difference and saying, based on this, the phone is X amount of distance away.
Okay.
So that's what these ranging, it's called ranging data. So you got Nilos, PCMD, RTT. These are different technologies, TrueCall, different technologies across different mobile carriers. TrueCall is created by a guy named Vladon, who's I know very well. And in its former company called Newfield Wireless, and that's what T-Mobile uses. That was what was being used in the Melly case. So in the Koberger case, they don't have any of those technologies and it being used. Now that data isn't that system that tracks this stuff isn't always deployed in every area. It's by case basis. Plus, also a lot of these, if you're doing like a wiretap order, they'll deploy these technologies on a phone. But you would have to know somebody's potentially going to commit a crime ahead of time, right? In
Yep.
your case of Mr. Koberger, that is not the case, right? They
Right.
didn't know ahead of time.
Right.
So Nilos, PCMD, RTT, I haven't seen any of that data in the case yet. That's what's called ranging data, but that only tells you how far out from the cell phone tower you are, which could be this big arc, right? There's an arc. So cell tower coverage comes out here with some back lobes, and they go, well, you're this far away distance. You could even be that far in the opposite direction.
Okay.
So these are there are major problems with the methodologies that's being used, including by the methodology used by the individuals that make the software, because the individuals that make software are former cops that went to the same bad school the rest of these people went to.
I
And
totally
they're and
understand.
Hence why you ever wonder why in all these cases they never have a cell engineer testify?
No.
There's 300,000 of them in the US. Nobody's testifying. None of the cell engineers from the cell carriers are allowed to testify.
Huh.
They don't want them testifying.
Ah, that that makes about sense, huh? I never actually have seen like a person from an entity, one of that, major cell carriers come in, and I've never seen that. You just made me realize that.
Yeah, they never
Yeah.
do. And it's on purpose. They won't call them. They refuse to testify. So
Got
here is a shameless plug here, but here's our school, right? And you can share that on screen. We actually have a school that teaches this entire certification process of getting certified to be able to do this stuff. We cover all the technologies, estimating location and legal workshop, how to get this stuff, how to read the FCC's documents. Our instructors are just phenomenal. I mean, it's Dr. Avisa Kosinick and Dr. Zach, and then there's me and there's David Burgess too. David wrote the software for the CIA that does cell interceptions. So he worked in interception technologies. And Dr. Zach, all of them, they work. I mean, they're professors at Florida Institute of Tech that teach cellular engineering. They're amazing, right? So that's unfortunately, the reason we built this school is because we saw so many people doing this incorrectly that were just guessing, right? They're using these pie-shaped wedges and saying that's the arrow and that's the direction, so that's the directionality of where the phone is at. And um, to date, right now, since we kind of really took this serious a couple of years ago, it's been a while since the government hasn't pulled their data out of the case. Every case they've withdrawn all the cell data for us. We get involved in the case and they just pull it out. In Koberger's case, here's what you can tell. If you want to see where direction, in other words, you want to be able to plot some dots on a map to say somebody went from here to here to here to here because the cell tower could broadcast 5 miles and these are more than 5 miles apart from each other, you can build a pattern in history of where somebody went. Absolutely, without a doubt. That's something. But to say somebody's sitting on the corner of First and Main Street is a whole different story. That's
that.
not, you can't do that.
That makes sense.
That
So,
now,
in
if you get the phone, the data in the phone is highly accurate because it has a chipset inside. And I used to be vice president of a company called GPS Core Technologies. We are the ones that developed the software in your phone to allow your phone to talk to the chipset in the phone.
okay,
So the chipset in the phone receives signals from outer space in the GPS constellation, and that can receive anywhere from 2, 3, 5, or 7 towers, antennas per se. The more accurate your reading is. But the reason Google Maps knows, which I worked with them back in the day, this is where this is all started. The reason they know you're in the left lane versus the right lane is because that receiver in your phone is highly accurate. So the third party applications, we call them OTA apps, over the top applications. Those applications that sit on top of your phone, Waze, Google, Life 360, hiking applications, those are highly, highly accurate. There's absolutely, if law enforcement gets that data from the phone, there is no arguing that that data is not correct. That is
okay,
absolutely 100% accurate and very accurate as to not only the location of the phone, but even with satellite drift and everything a defense expert could throw at it, you're still going to be able to place somebody in a house.
okay, okay. That makes a lot of sense because, like
Different
I
set
said,
of data. Yeah.
yeah,
One is
and
network data from the cell carrier, one is data from the cell phone itself.
okay, because that makes sense to me as someone who I used to DoorDash. So the app, it can tell when I'm in my house versus when I'm in my driveway versus when my car actually pulls out and now I'm on my street. So that explains that then how sort of how those kinds of things work and how they pretty much, or it's a way to relate it, at least is a better way to say it. It knows exactly where you are far more precisely as you move around, even like a piece of property.
Yes. Like sometimes people call here and they go, I want to do what the Murdoch case did and all this stuff. And I go, look, one, they're idiots because they had their cell phone GPS on, they had apps tracking their movements and everything. And that case had every bit of beautiful forensic data you could ever want in a case. We are never that lucky in cases to get that much data. And I have to admit, I'm like, these are the dumbest criminals ever because they absolutely had everything turned on that could track them. And that's why, and people call you and they go, well, I want to do the same thing. I want this data here and I want this and I want this. And then you're not going to get that, right? That's a unicorn in our industry because there's about 10 sets of data that prove the defendant was somewhere. Um, in most cases, we're lucky to get one, maybe two, right? So we're in the Koberger case, my understanding so far is they have some pictures with some GPS data embedded inside of it. And then, but you have to be careful on that. Somebody can text you a picture that has a GPS location inside that does, and you save it to your pictures, but it doesn't mean you were there.
Okay.
So and then they have call detail records, which is the billing records to the network carrier. That's
Okay.
it.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, if we can transition back to the social media thing, because I am really interested in the connection that you were able to make. So, from your document, I gathered that you did, find it must have been a slew of guaranteed, like emails. It was on like the third page or so, but it looks like emails, usernames for Cash App and All Trails. It looks like you found a Twitter. Um, and then are those the things that you then used to make sure that the Instagram you were looking at was actually Brian's?
So here's the way this works. And I'm going to see if I can just log into the system and I'll show you.
And I just
Because
want to preface the story for you. So I got a message, frankly, I'll edit this part of our conversation out if you really care. But I got a message, frankly, from Steve Gonsalves, the family of the father of Kaylee. And he more or less told me that the prosecution's expert is having like a really hard time doing whatever it is that you did. They believe there is a connection and they literally cannot make the connection. I'll tell you, wait, because if you're giggling now, you're gonna laugh even harder then. So what was told to me is that Brian had some kind of app or otherwise software installed on his cell phone that was periodically wiping the device and making it hard for locations to be found and making it hard to create the solid connection. So they can't locate him. They're having a hard time putting him in specific places, but they're also having a hard time even replicating what you found on social media. So I just wanted to clarify that that's why I'm asking about your actual document, because I know that that's been told to me that the prosecution's experts, they can't do what you've done here.
well, I mean, there's no real talent on our end to do this, honestly. Like this is all done by software, you know. So long story short is we did some work for the Human Trafficking Institute. Howard Buffett is a friend of mine. We've known each other for a long time. Um, Seems weird that one of the richest guys in the world would be my friend, but we actually grew up close to each other. He's many years older than me, but um, I bought an old bank in a place, Decatur, Illinois, of all places, and we had a forensic laboratory in the bank, and we rented the second half of the bank out to the Republican downstate representative Dan Calkins. Okay, so Dan's in there. Dan's friends with Howard. Howard and I became friends, and we've stayed kind of casual friends ever since. And one day he calls me and says, "Hey, Andrew, I fund the Human Trafficking Institute, and I got a whole staff full of people over there. And law enforcement's asked us for a bunch of money to buy some software, right? And I don't know what any of this is. Can you help me out?" And I said, "Well, sure, I'll take a look at it." And hence came a request to buy the software called Shadow Dragon. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I worked in the military. I did intel work. I worked at NASA in geospatial. I worked at space and warfare. I worked running the forensics lab at Scott Air Force Base for all 13 Joint Unified Commands. I've seen some stuff, right? I had root level access to 3-star generals' emails on a daily basis without any auditing. I mean, we could do anything we wanted on any network. We're the forensic people, right? And you couldn't even tell we were on there. That was an interesting thing. So
That's
we did a
amazing.
lot of investigative work. So I've seen a lot of intelligence programs and stuff, and I'd never heard of these guys, right? So I called my friends over in the intel community. I said, "The hell are these people, right?" And they said they've been doing work with us for a while, and I go, "Interesting, all right." And I said, "What do they do? Like, what's the deal?" So I called them up, and they said, "Sorry, we can't talk to you. You're not DIA, DOD, CIA, OD&I, And they said, pound sand. And I said, "Well, I have a substantial amount of money sitting right now in queue that I can't release to you unless I know what the heck you do, right?" Like, and they said, "Yes, Daddy. What do you want to know?" And I said, "Okay," because it was a lot of money. It was substantial, right? So they showed me their product, and I said, "I'm really kind of blown away. Like this is pretty awesome stuff." I says, "All right, I'm going to approve this." Well, a couple of deals later, I says, can I buy from you? My company." And I don't think they'd ever thought about selling outside of the DoD, right? It's one of those things. And they says, "Sure." Now they actually sell to people outside the DoD. They created their own division to do that. And it's got some less capabilities in the DoD, but it's very interesting. You're still with me, right? You there?
I lost a
No, it's
really
all good.
important guy. Thanks so much for waiting.
No problem.
Sorry.
So to continue on, I get this. I vet this company, right, and then they allow me to buy their software, and then before you know it, they asked us to be the managed service provider. We got really good at using their software, and what it does is it does this. So typically, let's talk about you and I. If you and I right now go to Facebook and you type in my email address and click enter, you will not find me because Facebook does not allow you to do that type of search.
Okay.
And give me a second. I gotta put you on mute for 1 second. I got somebody here. I'm gonna let in, and I'm gonna
Absolutely.
tell them to wait in the waiting room for me. Give me a
Oh,
second.
take your time.
All right, back with you. Sorry. So, So typically, let's say you and I search on Facebook for my email address, it doesn't come up with me, right? But in Shadow Dragon, it would,
Okay, that makes sense.
because there are application programming interfaces, we call them APIs. This is what advertisers use to query networks and get your data and find out what your interests are. Those APIs, there's public ones that everybody knows about, and then there's private ones nobody knows about. Now, the law says it's got to be public in order, otherwise they would consider it kind of like an invasion of your privacy. So these things, these APIs were private, they became public, but they're not well known. There's a difference. So it's like if you bury your API on a web page somewhere that nobody can get to, it's still public. It's just not accessible, right?
Okay.
So what Shadow Dragon has done is they've combined all these into one system, and they've they basically created a tool that allows you to search through massive amounts of social media data. So for instance, if you use an email address to sign up for Facebook and you have an alias, that alias could be related to Instagram. That Instagram could be related to a phone number. That phone number is related to your Cash App. Your Cash App transactions will show up because you can query them. You start putting all that stuff together, and it really just kind of builds this huge worldwide map. Um,
Is that the image that I'm looking at on the front of your document?
yeah, it's
A
this kind of
visual
like
of the web?
yes.
Okay.
So it's just basically a huge um, visualization map of the connections between everything. Now, that doesn't mean you vetted everything, and it doesn't mean it's 100% accurate. But it's very interesting to think that if you use the email to register for one thing and it found the email somewhere else, linked together. Um, it basically it makes it very interesting that that email would even be used on something else, right? So let
Right.
me show you, and I think I can. And let me see if I can pull one up that I'll share with you, and we'll talk from there.
Okay.
Let's see if I have something. I was trying to see if I've got covers. I don't even think I kept it. I think I. So what happened was is we had this thing. Nobody really cared. I mean, nobody really knew about it. So we didn't take the case. So I just shotgunned it to the because I heard the news and people were saying they didn't know how they're related. So I shotgunned it to the family's attorney and I says, "Hey, this looks like the connection between the two." And I didn't even get a response back. They didn't say anything to me. And then, a year later, you approached me and said, where'd you get this from? And we created it, right? We didn't do it by hand. We used some software tools that do it. Um, but let me give you, let me show you what this looks like on screen. Right. Let me, all right. Let me present, share screen here, and let's talk about a window. All right. Here's Shadow Dragon. You're looking at it. Okay.
Oh, I don't think
What
you're
you're looking
sharing
at.
with I don't think you're
Oh,
sharing with me right now.
let's see here. Present. Let's try it again. Window. Share.
There we
It's
go.
coming up now.
Okay. Oh, it went away again. I wonder what just made that happen. Hmm.
Weird.
All right, can we try that one more time? And if not, then I guess I won't be able to show it. It pops up for a brief moment, and when I go to add it, it disappears. It's very interesting. Oh. Oh, of course, it's the good part, and I can't pull it up. Let's see.
I got another way to do this. Let me stop my cam for a second.
No, I don't think I can hear you very well.
Give me 1 second.
Oh, now I can hear you much better.
All right, give me 1 second. Okay, give me 1 second here. I'm gonna solve our problem.
Okay.
I don't know why it won't let you see it. It's probably because we're remoted into another system. But I'll give you a quick peek of what this thing looks like. What I'm doing is taking another webcam. I'm gonna connect it because mine's mounted permanently, I think. I'm gonna just show you my screen.
Oh, thank you.
And all right, here we go. Take a look
Okay.
here. Okay. This is a visualization platform. And what this does is allows us, let me go in here. You can see the connections. So as you drop in somebody's name, it will footprint out and show you the relationships. It shows you here. I can go in here and say, I want to see more information about this. I want to extract the user information. And it starts building out this map.
Okay. So the map
See,
and then everything that comes from the map, you
yeah,
can
like
pull specific and pieces of information, download those as well, and that's how we fill in the pages behind the map. Okay.
this is a case where this individual right here was accusing a man of raping her, and we found by using this data a secret account with Proton Mail. We found that account was related to a dog's Instagram. That dog's Instagram was related to an alias. That alias was related to another account that linked all the way back to her FetLife account, where she was advertising for forced rape play and to sell the rape videos.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So this tool is super powerful. And when I click a button, it'll rearrange everything, shows you like, so I could take this map here and I could just rearrange stuff and rearrange and show the social connections and how those things grow apart. I mean, this is very, very powerful tool, like right hub and spoke model, who's doing stuff. Now I could take a single alias and say, okay, give me everything about this, right? I want to know their connections, who they're connected to, how many people they're connected to, who's posted to stuff. I could take a single an account and say, get me who's following that account, get me those accounts. And it takes a couple minutes, per query, but then it'll start footprinting out all these connections, and this map can get really messy really quick. I mean, you can get to 60,000 entities in 30 minutes or so.
Okay. Totally get it. I
So
totally get it.
so
So When I'm
You can,
looking at the document for Brian Koberger, I see is it Twilio or Twilio user? And it
Twilio
looks
user.
like, okay,
Yeah.
Twilio. And it looks like there
Okay.
is a cell phone number there. Is that, was
Give me a
this
second.
number connected to an account? Okay.
I'm gonna switch cameras back to the other camera.
Okay. I think you might be muted.
hear me now?
Yep.
Good. Okay. Sorry about that.
Verizon.
Technology to get this to work, but that's okay. So, yeah, so we didn't vet any of the data, right? I kind of just sent shotgun this off, so like you're gonna have to vet it yourself, kind of deal. But given here's the deal: in order to be friends with somebody, sometimes they have to add you, right? So you can't have a dead person add you. That's you got to put two and two together. That if somebody's dead and deceased, and somebody tried to fake an account and build one after the fact, they can't get the other person to add you as a friend because they're dead, right? They don't have.
Now, if their account is like a public account where you can just follow them and you don't have to have a request, approved.
Yeah, you can follow.
Okay. So
And
that,
sometimes it requires approval on that and stuff, but we didn't vet any of this data. This was more like a thread to pull on. And then what we do from these reports out of Shadow Dragon is we go through and start vetting all the data. But we weren't, we have 470 open cases, right? I I don't do this as a hobby, right? It's like, and it's not like my side mission. This is our business, right? We do this for a living. So even though Koberger's case and there's four dead people, I have cases where there's 20 dead people and, mysteries to be solved and they're paying the bills, because so we were on to the next case. We did not stick around, and I just shotgunned this off to the family's attorney, and said, "Hey, I know people said there's no connection. I'm seeing this connection. You might want to look into this." And that's it. That's kind of where we left things until
when I
you reached
first
out.
heard Brian Koberger's name, I too went to Google. I did a Google search for 28-year-old Brian Christopher Koberger of Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, and I found one Instagram, which I do believe might be the Instagram that you found. And then while I was looking at that Instagram, I noticed that he was connected to Kaylee and Maddie. And then as I'm looking at it, I noticed more Brian Koberger Instagrams are appearing. So I know they made fake Instagram accounts, but I believe that I saw the one that you are referring to here, and I think it's real. Not to mention the Twilio number. I was asking about that because Twilio they provide services to DoorDash. And that night there was a DoorDash at nearly the exact time of the murders. So I found that to be interesting as well. And it kind of makes your document seem more credible. But for whatever reason that it is, the prosecution's experts are having a very hard time following and finding that same information that you found.
Well, it could be that the social media company took it down too.
Well,
I
if
mean,
they didn't believe it at first, then that would be a problem.
well, what happens is they get, so this is kind of interesting. If you go to facebook.com/preservation, I think it is, or instagram.com/preservation, you can type in your badge number, social media account, and hit enter, and it will preserve the account and put it in the suspension state so nobody can see it.
Okay.
You do not have to have a court order to do something like that. You literally just click a button. So there could have been 50 officers all looking into this, and any one of them could have clicked a couple buttons and had this thing locked down where nobody could get to it.
Okay. That makes sense.
So, yeah, so those things disappear all the time. We're like, well, what happened to the social media account? Well, law enforcement locked it down. They just put in a preservation order, and as part of that preservation order, no, when I say that preservation order, there's exigent circumstances, they just go in and click a button. It's not like they actually have an order from the court. It's just called preservation order, right? So that kind of stuff happens all the time.
Now I have a question as well, pertaining to because he did follow Kaylee and Maddie. If Kaylee's Instagram has now been legacied to her family and they still have access to that, is there a way to find the past connection to Koberger from Kaylee's Instagram?
Possibly, yes. I mean, if we have the person's username and password to actually log into their account, this thing even becomes way better, right? We're looking from the outside in, but if we're looking from the inside out, these maps become much more detailed into other data. Plus, we can also do like a full archive of the whole account. I can look at the past. There's log files that are kept within the account that tell you the specific information.
Okay.
You know,
That makes a lot
I'm
of sense.
sure that Idaho's now has the full attention of the FBI and Secret Service and everybody else involved in this case because it's a high profile case. So they're getting assistance, probably, my guess is, from a place called the National Domestic Communications Assistance Center. That is exactly what they're there for. Officers call them and say, I need to get Instagram this, I need to get Facebook this, and they help them write the process to get that information. They write help them write the motions. They help them get the data. They have the relationships with the cell carriers.
That's
So they
awesome.
get all that. That's their job. That's their role. It's a huge facility, and that's all they do is help law enforcement get that data.
That's awesome. Now, when we are looking at your document and we see where it says Instagram users, there are 1,089. Are we looking at just Instagram accounts that were followed or following the alleged Brian Koberger account? Or what exactly are we looking at when we see the itemized list there of Instagram users?
You'd have to show me what
I
you're
can
looking at.
I can show you. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but here it says Instagram users and it says like 1089, and then there's like a bunch of, some of them are weird. So for example, 1194, that's his month and year of birth. 1112 KED, like knock them dead or kill them dead. That's actually the day of the event, like the night before the event. So I just noticed that a lot of these actually pertain to things. And there's a number of places where, like, if they are users, like here, for example, Brian Koberger following himself potentially. So I was wondering, like, what those were. In that list, you also do see Kaylee and Maddie. So it is some sort of connection, but is it people he followed, or did those people follow him in return? Did those people not?
Both.
Okay.
I think you're going to see both in there. Yeah, you're going to see following and following from.
Okay.
And then I'm going to, and so we have. Let me show you here.
And I also know you have someone waiting, so you really don't have to go on with me.
Yeah, I got just a couple more minutes and then I got to run. But let's go here. Here I can show you. There's the day we talked to the prosecutor. This is actually our initial quote for services and what it would cost sent to the prosecution's office.
Okay. The public defender?
Sorry, I mean the public defender. Sorry.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Hey, sorry.
Oh. So
Too many cases.
No, absolutely. So I think for the most part, that was everything that I wanted to ask. I just wanted to ask one last question about the wiping app or software that they say he may have had on his phone to get rid of the GPS locations and make it such a hardship to make connections. That doesn't sound, I don't know why, but it doesn't sound plausible or possible to me.
What app did they say?
They didn't. So what I did is I went and I did like a Google search and I found like data eraser apps. And generally they're used for like when you want to pawn or sell a device and you want to make sure, so like iSky Soft, data eraser, stuff stuff like that. But I was just wondering like, how does it, because I see your face right now. You are so
What is
perplexed.
it? Was it an iPhone or Android?
It's an Android.
Okay, so Android, nothing's off limits, right? You could do a bunch of nasty stuff in Android. If it's an iPhone, it'd be a different story because iPhone typically application developers save their data in what's called a secure enclave, and applications do not have a right to wipe out data out of the secure enclave, just wholesale wipe data. Apple's very secure. Android, you can do anything under the sun, right? So you can write your own custom script and load it in there and run it and delete data. I would want to know what application it is. If you find out, let me know. I'll be glad to look into it. But I think in general, there is applications like Data Eraser and a couple others. They usually advertise themselves as a way to get rid of data and save yourself from the police getting to it, and then they get shut down real quick because there's actually a law that says you can't sell it that way. Because there's a company back in the day, eraser.com, eraser.exe, and it had to do with don't get caught by the police, erase your data kind of deal. And the FBI came in and arrested the guy for selling it that way.
Yeah.
But a lot of people bought it for a while. He made a lot of money. But yeah, let me know if you find anything because with Android, yeah, it's possible, but I haven't seen anything that does that or does what you're talking about effectively where us forensic people can't get the data back. Right.
That's literally what I meant. Like, I assume it would work on me. I don't assume it would work on you. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we typically, I mean, if we didn't get data back from phones, we would be in real trouble because our job in our industry would be gone, right? We wouldn't exist. So the fact that we get all this data back is a good thing. Now I'm more worried about not deleting a data. I'm more worried about overwriting data. So if somebody deletes something on their mobile phone, there's a likelihood we can get a lot of that back. It depends on what type of data, right? Of course. If they delete a picture, most likely we get the picture back. But if you download 4 massive Hollywood movies to overfill your phone and overwrite the prior deleted data, then I can't get it back, right? Then it's overwritten, and that's more of a problem than deleting. Okay. Overwriting is definitely more of a problem. Okay. But yep, I got to run, but feel free to reach out. I appreciate you taking time. I know you're passionate about this. You sent me a few emails asking me, and I've been running around the world. I was in a trial 2 weeks ago in Georgia. I was in Kathmandu, Nepal, working on a case with an American locked up abroad last week. Just flew back in yesterday. So I travel the world doing this type of stuff. I'm passionate about this too, passionate about the truth and using forensics to get to the truth. So let me know what you hear. I'm interested, and I'm not working for the defense, so the family is free to call me. I know they're working on some stuff. If they want to call and talk, please. I know you may have a direct line to them. Tell them to give me a call. We'll have a chat. I feel bad about what's happened.
I appreciate that. They'll be so happy to hear that. Thank you so much.
I think, I look at the case and sometimes people always say, well, you do defense work. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. We don't defend anybody. Attorneys defend people. We look at evidence. We write about evidence, and there's no spin to it. And a lot of times we write reports that tell our client they are guilty. We tell them, look, you don't want to go to trial. Here's what's going to happen. And here's the truth of the matter. And they take our report and they go, wow, I should probably take a plea deal. And I said, yeah, I would highly suggest you take your plea deal, because if you go to court with this, you're just going to it's going to be an end of you, right? You're never going to see that side of a jail cell. You probably spend life in jail. And so it's interesting. I think I heard something about the family suing the police department or something like that. Anytime this type of stuff happens in some like rural America, small town cops, I cringe, right? Because they don't have the resources to do this. And unfortunately, and this is going to sound like a dig on law enforcement. It's not, it's just reality, right? Arrogance prevails. Everybody thinks they can do everything. They don't ask for help from anybody. And that's it. I mean, the typical mentality of law enforcement is they're the only ones with the license to investigate. But I'm sorry, as you could tell, most citizen reporters like yourself have investigated this more in depth than the law enforcement unit has, right? And that happens all of the time. And they rarely reach out and say, we need help. We don't understand how to deal with this. And by the time they do, they've trampled all over everything. They've trampled all over the evidence. People have screwed things up. It's a mess in the media. Instead of just saying, we need to call the governor's office and say, I need everything you have, right? I can't do this. But they don't. I mean, I have criminal cases I have civil cases that end up criminal. Like, for instance, I'll find a computer, it'll have child pornography all over it, right? And I will bring it to law enforcement center and say, hey, I'm involved in a divorce case, and the husband has all this child porn. He's got messages about trolling town looking for kids. And I will give it to law enforcement center, and they won't touch that case for 2 years. They'll let another kid become a victim because it didn't start with them. It has to start with them. They are the only ones that think they have a license to investigate, and they don't want anybody else doing or touching anything they have. And it's a bad mistake. So that's why in this case, I fear the defense may have the upper hand on law enforcement in this, because law enforcement has to come to the table and say, we learned from the very people the defense hired. They were our instructors in ZX school, right? Or, and nobody's getting the right people involved.
I totally understand. After today, I hope that someone will at least feel some kind of pressure to get the right people involved.
They better get the right people involved, because it's going to be an absolute crap show. I mean, we watch it on TV all the time. We watch national trials. We're shaking our head going, that's not right. All of us, the entire forensic industry's online messaging each other like, these are idiots on the witness stand. But, poor attorneys, they didn't go to school to become a brain surgeon or cellular engineer. They went to school to learn law, right? They just, they sometimes go with whoever sounds the sexiest, and they call their one friend in law enforcement and say, who would you hire? And the law enforcement officer goes, I'd hire this guy over here. And I go, that's a former law enforcement officer preaching the same bad stories you did. It's like, wrong person, right? Go talk to the engineers that developed it. Go do your homework. Do like we do. Go sit down with the CEO of BitTorrent like we did, and sit down with their engineers and take the time to do it right. And if you do, you'll find that sometimes the world isn't what everybody thinks it is. And I always say, but there is one rule of thumb I have in everything, and it's on a poster here in our office. It says, incompetence doesn't mean conspiracy theory, because it just means people are incompetent.
Yes.
But I'm not saying we're the best at everything, but we're pretty good at some things, and we know the answers.
You're pretty well up there.
We understand this at a level most people don't. But I got a meeting to talk about cellular stuff with some people that are here, and I appreciate you, and good luck with what you're doing, and reach out anytime, okay?
Thank you so much. I appreciate all your time. Have a great day.
Thanks. Talk soon.
Time. I mean, we are either on the witness stand testifying that the government got something wrong, or they're on the witness stand testifying that we got something wrong. But the whole reality is, you apply scientific methods and principles to it, and we hope that we're all on the same page. If everybody is on the same page all the time, you wouldn't have a court hearing. There wouldn't be a battle. There would be no such thing as criminal court, and we would just accept whatever the government says and keep moving on. But the government's not always right. I mean, we take a look at bite mark evidence. It was used for 15 years, and then they ruled it as a horribly bad science and threw it out of everywhere. I mean, we had an entire teams at Quantico. We had law enforcement units that were all centered around bite mark evidence, and then they find out it's all just hocus pocus and completely made up, and there's nothing behind it. But that's what happens. That's why we challenge sciences. If we didn't, everybody would still think the world's flat.
Absolutely.
That's old adage. So yes, am I going to come down hard on some people? I absolutely am, because I know the difference, right? It's kind of like people standing up and supporting their religion. There's a reason why. They believe in it and they have a conviction in it, but mine's not a religion. This is science, and there's a lot of materials to support what I'm saying. There's no materials provided by the government so far to support what they're saying, or Cy Ray. Now, Cy Ray, I think, don't get me wrong, I think he's a smart guy. I think his software that he used oversimplified something very technical, and in doing so, it lost a lot of accuracy.
Okay.
And that's what happens. So.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So let me take us back to our original conversation. Okay. My first question is, when you looked at the cell phone evidence, that was the initial cell phone evidence from the month of the arrest, correct? In December of 2022, when he was arrested, there was.
Search warrant. Yeah, that was
Okay.
the basis for the search warrant. That was very rudimentary and highly inaccurate. That's
Okay. Okay. So there was another warrant for the AT&T cell phone that was obtained on March 30th of 23 and then served in April and returned around mid-April. And my next question would be, this warrant and any new or additional information that may be able to be developed from it, that wouldn't be included in anything that you had looked at by April of 23 when they got the return for the second AT&T warrant. You would have
yeah,
been.
no.
Okay.
I just had the one search warrant application in which they had made the claim that Mr. Koberger drove south and turned off his phone and then drove back up north, and that there's not even cell towers there. You can't even make an assumption like that. Like, you have no idea. I mean, you could park, hike over the edge of the mountain, you could cut through, you could do signals bounce all over the place. So you can't just say there's a road, so we think you drove down the road because we have cell phone service here and here. That's the only way around. That's got to be it. You can't do that. I mean, think about if I was flying, now, not saying he was flying in a plane, but using it as an example, if you were flying in a plane, what would that look like then? It would look like you drove around and not understanding you're in a plane. So you can't just throw assumptions out there right there. I mean, I think the more proper way that they should have put that is they had evidence showing him here, and they have evidence showing that he was talking to the cell tower here, and that's it. The brain can put the two together and say you traveled from point A to point B. You don't have to say, oh, drove on this path, right? They don't even know
Right.
he had a car. I mean, they have no idea.
Okay.
So that kind of stuff is just, I mean, you don't want to be inaccurate. That's the number one thing that'll ruin your case, right? Don't do that. We don't guess. We have to know.
Okay. So my next question would be, when they went back and did a second search warrant for the cell phone, March, April of 2023, do you see additional information having come from that second search warrant? Anything that would be useful at all?
I mean, the limitations of all this is these are call records, right? So
Mhm.
you get date and time to and from, or you get what's called timing advance records, which is a measurement of path between the cell tower and the cell phone. And the timing advance records adds more to it because then you can get an idea of what is the maximum range you could be from a cell tower. So it tells you, could you be close or could you be far away? Because it's path, right? So if I have path in a straight line, the maximum distance between point A and point B is X. Let's say it's 5 miles. But if it bounces around really close to the cell tower, you may only be an eighth of miles from the cell tower. But you could tell max range then. So that got added to it for max range.
Okay. Okay. And then another question that I had from our original conversation, radio frequency. You said that they did not use radio frequency. If they went back and added in radio frequency, could this finalized cast report be a little more accurate?
Um, I, I could show you something. I think it might be best. Let me show you a case from
Okay.
Cast from a couple weeks ago, right?
Okay.
And let me put some context in this. So let me I can share, let's see here, slides, PDF. A second here and I'll pull it up. Okay, let's go here. So this is an FBI cast report, okay? And this is just a couple weeks ago, right? I mean, this is not even though this happened in 2022. This trial just happened, right? Just a couple weeks ago in Washington D.C. area, Georgetown area. We can see here these are these triangle wedges that everybody uses, cast uses, right?
Yep.
I received this report. So what we did is we went in the field afterwards and we did drive testing. That's where we take engineering equipment in the field. We put it inside of a vehicle. We put the antennas on top of the vehicle and we drive around and survey the area. Now, the interesting thing about drive testing is there's two types. There's active and passive. Active means you have a cell account on the cell carrier's network, and that is least costly equipment. It's pretty cheap to buy that stuff. But the problem you have with that is you cannot guarantee what towers were even available at that time, like because the network, there's a bunch of things that happen in the network that say whether something's available or not. So basically, let's say I'm here at number 1 and I'm driving straight north. The question is when do I get handed off to another cell tower? Well, with an active account, it's going to hand you off when your signal gets weak. No, we can't guarantee that that network is behaving in a certain way today as it behaved back then, because there's a lot of factors that come into play. You got cell hysteresis, you have neighbor construction list, you have a bunch of things that happen on network engineering wise. And these aren't anomalies. This is every day what happens all day long. Okay. But what we can guarantee is that the antenna on top of that tower is tilted downwards, and it probably has not changed since 2022. And the reason we know that is because in this area of the world here, at least in Washington, D.C. area, the government has contracted with Gladiator Forensics to drive test the entire DC area every single year for 5 years straight. And during that time period, they found that the network changed so negligible, it was like 0.02%. Because once you build a tower and you strap an antenna on it and you tilt it down, you leave it. It stays there. They don't move it, right? There's no reason to go up there and start dinking with towers. I mean, when's the last time you've seen somebody on the top of a cell tower that's been in place for a while, adjusting or building an antenna or crawling up the tower? None. We don't see that because it doesn't happen. Cell carriers, I mean, these guys are a $400 billion industry. They are very compelled to get it right the first time. They have tons of engineers that go in the field and design these networks and everything, and they get it right the first time, so they don't have to go back. So because of that, we know that a network in 2022 will most likely behave the same will have the same radio frequency footprint in 2025.
Okay.
So if you have a murder that happens in 2022, it doesn't matter that you're testing in 2025, because guess what? That's also what the government does. When they go drive testing in cases, they can't rewind the clock. We don't have a time machine, right?
Makes sense.
So they test today. Now, we went out and tested in this area. Now, notice there's a thing there that says EC, and I'm going to go up a little, and it's got crime scene. They're on top of each other, okay? Right here.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to zoom in, and this may not be that apparent. Okay, right here. See that area right there? They're both on top of each other, okay? Eaton Court and the crime scene. Okay. This is the call detail records that are copied into this. Now, when we drove test, we found that there's coverage from the cell tower all the way over here on the left-hand side, bunch of cell coverage over here, all over the place, right? So we submitted our drive test data to the government as an exhibit to use at trial. Immediately afterwards, the government files a brand new exhibit, and here it is. And they all of a sudden now show this is a drive test illustration, which you can tell does not match a 120-degree perfect wedge.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, to me, I'm scratching my head. I'm like, are you telling me you guys went out in 24 hours and drove test the area? No. Let me tell you what they did. They had already drove test the area 2 years before that. They had the data.
Yeah.
But they had the data, but they didn't use it. And let me show you what's really interesting. Let me go down here to, sorry to make your eyes spin for a second. take a look here. Guess what? The crime scene is not in the 120-degree wedge anymore, because the 120-degree wedge, sorry, it's in the wedge, but it's outside of the radio frequency footprint for that tower because they drug test it, and there is no cell coverage at the crime scene. But if you go back to their earlier map and use the 120-degree wedge and use the call detail records, you would place the defendant at the crime scene.
Yes. Okay. That makes
This
sense.
is their own data. This is their report. And you can see here, look at all this coverage, sorry, up here on the backside of the antenna.
Mhm.
If antenna's only broadcasting 120-degree perfect wedge, why do we have that? And then why do we have this island of coverage over here? I can explain to you
Correct.
why. That's on a hill. So towers are pointed north. Let's say in this case, it's southwest. But radio signal travels a bunch of places. You got main lobes, side lobes, and rear lobes, okay, for a cell antenna. So, like I said, I've shown this before.
Yep.
We'll get out my marker board here and I'll show a radio antenna broadcasting north here has a main lobe, side lobes, and 3 rear lobes. And the 120-degree wedge is right here. That is the best coverage area. That's where you get 5 bars of signal. That is not the total coverage area. But for a defendant in a case, or anybody, regardless, you have to understand total coverage area because they can be anywhere in the total coverage area. So in this case, this defendant could be up here, way outside that single antenna coverage that they're showing here. You could be on the backside. So
I was going to say additionally behind. Yep. Behind the tower there. Okay. Yeah.
So using these wedges are horrible ideas. Horrible ideas. The wedge represents a sector. That's a schematic for how to lay out a network. That doesn't mean that's where the radio signal travels.
Okay. Okay.
So
So from what I'm gathering here, right, layman terms for me, basically this is telling me that if they intermingled the two things, the 120-degree angle and the amoeba that ZX uses, they'd still need refinement. But in some way, it looks to me closer to the tower, like each of those things could be plausible, but then it still needs refinement because of all the additional space surrounding where we're outside of that.
When I say plausible, there is zero signal here at the crime scene. They cannot communicate with that tower, no matter what. It does not change. That will stay the same every day, all day, 365 days a year. There's no coverage.
Okay, so that's how wrong this is.
That is definitive. That line that's drawn here is where the radio frequency ends. And it may be that there's a big building in the way, right? And you can't go through a building or a mountain or whatever. That's why you can't use these things. So
okay.
Another example, let me show you, because this is not isolated. This isn't just like an isolated event here. Let me just pull up another court case. And I have hundreds that we can pull up. Like this is our everyday over here. So here's another one. Right, 120-degree wedges we see, and take a look at this. Hold on here. Take a look at this. Clearly, coverage is all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
That's drive test data. And there's an island of coverage out here. So this cell tower here broadcast all the way out here. That's the dark green.
Okay? Yeah.
This cell tower here has coverage out here. It has coverage even out here because that's the side of a hill.
Okay.
So if you were thinking, well, if you were out here, you would be within the cell coverage of this tower here.
Not necessarily.
That's wrong. So that also defeats the purpose, defeats the government's other theory of when you travel 70% of the distance between two cell towers, you get handed off from one tower to another. That cannot be true, given that if you were standing on that hill right now, which cell tower would you use? Toss up.
Okay.
Are you 70% of the distance between one and the other? Would you be handed off? Absolutely not, because you're so far into the other one. And cell towers are multi-layered. These things are stacked on top of each other. They're all over the place. It's just layer on layer on layer on layer. So the idea of distance traveled means you get handed off from tower to tower. That is true if we go back to 2G days, back when towers were evenly spaced apart and they had big coverage areas.
Okay.
That technology's been gone forever, right?
Okay.
Ever. Like we haven't used that 20 years. But 3G, 4G, even 3G is gone now, but even 4G, 5G, it is layered on top of each other. You'll have 7, 8, 9 cells on top of each other easily on a single cell site. So terminology, cell site is a location where there's a cell. Cell tower is a physical structure. A cell means an antenna. So you can have 30 cells on one cell site, and that site could be the site of a building. A cell tower is a physical structure.
Okay.
So there's a lot of mixed up terminology, and I see reports all the time where people just mix up terminology.
Okay. Thank you. Because I know I've been mixing those up, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, everybody does. It's okay. And we try to be accurate in court because it's very easy to get them confused in whether we're talking cell site, or cell tower. We go, there's a cell tower, it's a physical structure. On that, we call that also a cell site because that's a site in which there's cellular service emitting from. And then there's multiple antennas on there, so there's multiple cells. Now, if we look at, you can go to a website called Cell Mapper. Anybody can. And what Cell Mapper is, and Cell Mapper, I think .net. Mapper.net. Alrighty. So if we go to cellmapper.net, and you can go to an area of the world, zoom in, click on a cell tower, and it will show you cell phones reporting in their location via applications like Facebook, right? It doesn't tell you their phone number because they don't collect that, but they do collect the GPS location of a phone connected to a specific tower. And what's interesting about that is you can get an idea of the visual footprint of that cell tower live today as we're speaking, phones reporting in. So let me see if I can pull this up.
That's cool.
Now you can't, the data is not kept around very long and it's not used by the government. It's more of like a visualization tool to see kind of what the network's doing, right? And you can see people that are way outside what you would think would be the normal coverage area of that cell tower. And you can see that they're reporting their location in, and sometimes they're 6, 7 miles opposite direction the cell tower's pointing.
Okay.
And we just finished a case in Bishop, California. So let me take a look here. Bishop. So Bishop, California. Let's see here. Let me pull it up. See what case it is. It's the Stang case is what we call it. We just finished our report in the Stang case. And let me pull up one of our reports and I'll show you because you'll be pleasantly surprised that the cell tower in that case broadcasts 28.7 miles. And we could still make a phone call on that cell tower. So I'm going to let's see here. I can show you. Let me not share everything in the case because this is an active case right now. We just filed our report, but I will screenshot a section out of it and give you an idea of how far these things broadcast. Because in this case, don't get me wrong, the cell tower was pretty high in elevation. Let me see here. Go ahead. I won't derail you. You got another question? Well, while I'm pulling this up, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of which, like stuff like this still, I have 2 questions that continue our conversation about cell site location information. When you couple those with something like Google search location information, does it become more accurate?
Google is highly accurate because it's a different set of data. Using network-based data, you got to think timing advanced records and I should probably show you so let me show you the thing. First of all, the patent, if reading the patent on these things, it's very obvious. This is not really designed, and let me show you. Let's go here. The patents on timing advance, it's very obvious this was never designed to actually like plot a dot in a map to show where a person is exactly at. It was more designed for understanding mass movements of phones. Like if we had a terrorist attack or Ebola in downtown Chicago, how long would it take us to evacuate? So if we take a look at timing advance in general, and you look up the World Health Organizations, they were like the major sponsor of creating timing advance.
Okay.
It had to do with that type of stuff. It did not have to do with tracking a specific phone. So give me a second here. I'm gonna pull something else up to show you, but let me go in here and let's go to cellular engineering and I'll look at our let's go here. Let's go to cast. So in everything I'm showing you here, we received from a court case, right? So there's nothing in here that can't be released because we received it in discovery in a court case. Now I imagine the government is not very happy that we received some of this stuff, but that's okay.
It went away.
Yep, I gotta take.
Okay.
Don't want to burn your eyes out till I get to the part I need to show you. Now, for the naysayers that are like, I'm wrong and the government's right, let me show you what the government really thinks about this. Here's their 2025 training guide right here. Network estimated distance of cellular device is not true GPS.
Okay.
From the horse's mouth. Now, they'll go to court and say it is.
And that's what the issue is here. Okay.
Yeah, and let me get to another part of it and I'll show you. Now, what it's often confused with is this. This is the real problem that we have with a lot of people doing research in this stuff come back and say, well, this is pinging a cell phone. This works this way and this way. Let me show you what they're really using. This 911 is way better because you're using 3 cell antennas at the exact same time to measure distance, and it's error correcting. And that's how GPS works from outer space too. Your phone receives a signal from multiple satellites in outer space. It does some error correction and figures out where you're at and puts you on the road. Very accurate.
This is actual triangulation.
This is triangulation using timing advance from 3 cell antennas at the exact same time.
Okay.
When you're using it from 1, you can't do this. You have to have 3. So if you ever go to Google Maps and it puts this big, giant, huge area and then it goes doo 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 and it shrinks down and goes down to where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
That's because it's talking to 1 antenna, shows a big area, and then it starts talking to 2, then 3, puts you a dot on the map.
Okay.
That's what happens.
Okay.
That's the same thing. So that is now.
Now I ask that because when they made that horseshoe thing, right? And they're like, this is the route he traveled home. Using the cell phone evidence, and I absolutely am not disagreeing. You're telling us that's not real. That can't happen. But when he turned his phone on, he also logged into a Google recovery email address. And there will be Google location services from that. So
maybe.
Okay. Possibly. He was using a VPN also.
None of that matters.
Okay.
What matters is whether the phone had a specific event that was using GPS. So just because I have GPS on my phone on doesn't mean that it's collecting GPS data. It's only until I open an application that uses GPS does that specific application record my GPS coordinates. So for instance, Life 360. Life 360 is an application that tracks where you're at. A lot of truckers use it for trucking companies and stuff. If they don't have 360 logged into and still have their GPS on, we get nothing from those phones. That doesn't mean
Okay.
anything. But if you
Okay.
get 360 on, then on interval, it's collecting the GPS location, it's submitting it to Life 360 servers, and it's stored there. Google, if you're navigating between your house and let's say Texas Roadhouse Steakhouse, right? You're navigating, Google's keeping track of where you're at. It's going to collect that data of where you went. But if you aren't navigating and aren't doing anything, there's zero GPS data. It's
Okay.
got to have a reason to use the GPS is on, but it's got to have a reason to use it.
To actually obtain something. And okay,
Other,
that makes sense.
otherwise,
to me
it just
too.
doesn't do anything. So if he logged into his Google account, I'm pretty sure that does not collect your GPS location. It doesn't really care. It collects the IP address that you logged in from, but not your GPS, because I've never seen Google data have that GPS from login. Now,
Okay.
if you used it to then search for a Starbucks, what would then happen is
Or
your
a place
phone
to
says,
create an alibi.
let's say you search for Starbucks, it'll send your GPS location into Google server, so then you find the closest Starbucks.
Okay, that
See the
makes
deal?
sense.
It's got to figure out where you're at. So
There has to be
a
a
lot of
triggering event for the GPS to obtain some
that's it.
information.
It's event
Okay.
driven. In most cases, it's event driven. Now, when I say event driven, that it could be on interval through a specific what we call over the top application, OTA app,
OTAs. Okay.
which the weather apps, right? You
Mhm.
ever get on a weather app and it knows where you're at? It knows where you're at from two reasons. One, either it collects your GPS, or two, okay, it knows based on the IP address you're connected from, and that IP is within a specific range. So my neighborhood may have IP range 74.139.50.50. Let's say my town, say a town, right? That
Okay.
range,
This is
50.50
interesting
to
too.
50.56, is a range for my town. So it knows what town I'm in to see the weather based on IP. So it necessarily isn't GPS either. It could just be based on IP.
Okay. Okay. So then that was my other, remember I said I had two more questions. That was the other one. Kaylee's dad has referred to like a Wi-Fi search and him having had like a handshake with the girl's Wi-Fi on those 23 occasions. So, when our phones are like, hey, you're pretty close to this Wi-Fi. It'd be better to be on Wi-Fi. Would you like to connect to this Wi-Fi? That's the handshake that he's talking about. And apparently during the prior visits, that's something that they're also able to overlap, is that the girl's Spectrum Wi-Fi has offered his telephone in history to connect to it because he's been close enough.
Okay, so Wi-Fi, so your Wi-Fi on your phone works a couple different ways. One is it can either constantly be searching for an open Wi-Fi and connect to it. Like if you have AT&T out of the box has new iPhones with provisioned already. When you go through, it'll do. So most of you don't know this. Just because you get an iPhone from carrier to carrier, that's not the same. Once you go through the setup process, believe it or not, the cell carrier, when you activate your phone, pushes down firmware settings into your phone and adjust your phone operating system. They make changes. Okay.
Okay.
That's why when you go in there, it says AT&T, or it says Verizon, and has the Verizon app on the phone and all this stuff. And you're like, well, how'd that happen? This is a brand new iPhone from Apple. They push that stuff down onto your phone. It's over the air provisioning. When they do that, they set up your Wi-Fi, like for AT&T, to connect to any open AT&T Wi-Fi hotspot. So when you're traveling along and you go to your neighbor's house for a barbecue and they have AT&T Wi-Fi, it'll connect you there because they want you connecting to their cable modem, fiber optic modem at home, because it's cheaper. They don't have to use cellular bandwidth then, and it costs them less money. So it's a cost saving provision.
Makes sense.
So in that case, that's automatic, right? Then there's also, you set it up where your Wi-Fi is constantly searching for Wi-Fi networks.
Mhm.
And in that case, a lot of times the phone will record what networks it's tried to connect to. Right?
Okay.
And then it also has a listing of what ones you did connect to. Those are usually kept, and they're kept for quite some time. So when we analyze mobile phones, I can see that you connected to well, I can see like you even drove by or connected to McDonald's 2114, and I can get an address from McDonald's 2114 because you can look that up online, and I can tell you were near within 300 yards of that McDonald's. So you can use that data to build a what's called pattern of life to see where somebody went. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
You can do that, but
So
it isn't.
I
It
believe
isn't.
some of these
It's
things are
accurate.
actually factors that are coupling with the cell site location information.
Yeah, what you need to do, because here's the deal. I can have cell site location, and if I'm right 8 out of 10 times, that's still not good enough. I have to be right 10 out of 10.
Yep,
I don't want to put 20% of the people that are innocent in jail.
that's
And I
right.
don't want to, and the government doesn't want to let 20% of the people that are guilty go. So it works both ways. I mean, accuracy is very important. So if we say we have more information to corroborate a story, that's better. You always want to take and get more information. So if I have somebody I know, for instance, if somebody says this cell phone was located at the house, well, how do I know the defendant had the cell phone in their hand? Well, if they had an email to their grandmother saying, "Hey, I'm cooking Thanksgiving dinner. It'll be ready in about an hour." I'm going to take it as extra evidence that says they were standing in their house, right?
Right.
That's what we're looking for. And in all cases, you want to find multiple points. Otherwise, the disclaimer is the phone is at the house, and the prosecution could ask me, "Can you guarantee the defendant had the phone in their hand?" No, but somebody was using it.
Okay.
And they go, "Well, we have a ring video that shows the defendant went in the house." Okay, somebody was still using it. Well, we have no ring video within the prior 12 hours that shows anybody else went in the house. Okay, now my opinion is more likely than not the defendant had the phone.
Okay.
It changes that standard. So our standard is either yes, no, or more likely than not yes, more likely than not no. Right? It's you have to have that 51%, but you have to put the disclaimer on there. Right?
Okay. Makes sense.
Otherwise, we're wrong. You can be dead wrong, and that's why I see a lot of cast reports. Matter of fact, since 2023, I've only seen 2 cast reports that didn't have draft marked on them. They went to trial with them still in draft mode.
Okay. Okay. So Anne's lucky that she even got a finalized cast report then, because
I think they forced them probably to give them a finalized cast report, because typically
good
what
for
happens
her.
is, imagine if you had a cast report and it wasn't marked draft, and then they proved that the person was on the backside of the cell tower an hour, a mile and a half away on video. You would undermine the credibility of all of what CAST does forever. So instead, mark it draft and then go, well, that's not our final report.
Yep. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. All right. I think I may have had one more last night in my live, but I can't remember what the question was and I didn't write it down. So we're going to skip that one. Okay.
Well, I got something to show you to circle back to it, because
Yes.
now I got it pulled up, is the distance that the government is trying to say from the cell tower. Here is the government's report they purchased. They hired a university to do this research for them. Here it is. This cell intent, let's take a look over here on the right. Location, right, of the mobile phone could be here. So if you look at the path bouncing off of B2 and getting to the mobile phone here, that distance is the same distance as from there to the outer boundary of the arc. It is not a straight line.
Okay.
You cannot, it is a path.
And this is
not
all
range.
because of, I assume this is like a building or something, and that's refragment.
Sure. And that happens everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's a tree, bushes, everything. It's
The mountain.
all over the place.
Yeah. Okay.
That's why you cannot just say, let's take a cell tower and let's measure out this many feet. But you can, if you're using 911 data from 3 different cell antennas, right? Your accuracy goes way through the roof because it corrects that stuff. Now, here's what's really interesting. The people that have designed this have never testified about it. They're prohibited from it. And the government actually provides the cell providers provide on their reports that the data shouldn't be used for location purposes, and that the cell carriers will not stand behind the accuracy or veracity or measurements taken.
Yeah.
They actually say that.
That's
I
because
went,
it is a draft report and they know there's errors. It makes sense. Okay.
yeah. So I went. So this is, you're gonna find some more interesting. I had somebody that teaches law enforcement recently send me a bunch after a podcast recently. They sent me a bunch of emails and they started this chat thread back and forth of just, I mean, they were just relentless in trying to prove their point, right? So what I did is I went back to the person who actually created it, to the patent holder, and roped them into the conversation because they were hanging their hat on this IEEE white paper, and this white paper says timing advance can be accurate. It says can. These are engineers. They use very specific terms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Give me 1 second here. Let me here you go. I'm actually going to share with you the actual email. I'd like to, let me see if I can. I'm going to screenshot part of it. I don't want to share every piece of it because the reason is I don't want to share his email address. So, okay, he'll start getting 100 emails on this. So let me go in here and I'll paste it in here, and I'll. Now this is a gentleman named Vlad.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just read it to you. It seems that everybody reads what they want to read in my paper. What is true is I advocated for TOA measurements to be used in court and recommendations multiple TOA measurements as the most reliable option. These are certainly better than tracks blobs. And I also gave one example using multiple TOA for CDRs and CDMA. And the estimations would be within 50 meters of the crime scene using multiple. So he's saying, and using multiple 2A measurements like 911 uses, you can have some accuracy. And then he goes on and on to talk about how if you take a look at the, it says 545 meters for GSM, could be greater than 89 meters due to quantization. And he said this is listed at page 28038, 28039, 28050, talking about basically figuring out distances using TOA in a straight line of sight using multiple cell antennas. That is not what is being used in these cases. And he says he is the designer of TrueCall.
I was
And
just going
because
to
of
ask
various,
if it's Vladimir of TrueCall, which is the
yep,
T-Mobile timing time.
correct.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and it's all the same. There's no difference. I mean, there's some algorithmic differences between some of it, but timing advance is timing advance. I mean, it's the same technology.
The difference
But
is basically the carrier that it's on,
it's
right?
pretty much, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's like everybody's got their own flavor of it. But TrueCall prevents me from sharing information because of NDAs with Newfield Wireless, which is a company he used to own. And he said he would never use this in court without a TrueCall engineer being there to explain the error ratios within this.
Okay.
Straight from the horse's mouth saying, do not use this in court unless you bring the engineers. Now, T-Mobile says they're not going to testify to it and that they don't stand behind the accuracy or veracity of it. But somehow the government magically is smarter than the engineer that designed it and the people that use it.
Mm-hmm.
They somehow now found a new way. Now, people say it's some novel idea or some new method or something like that. No, that's not true. I actually went through the TrueCall training, contacted the company, got in the TrueCall training, went through it, and actually I have screenshots of it and videos of it. I'd love to share. I'll send you a link later. It is not what you think. It is definitely not what you think. Like, it does not put a dot on a map and say that's where a person's at. It gives an area where a bunch of phones are at. It's saying, hey, a bunch of phones are northeast of the tower. change your power setting in this tower. You may want to increase it because you get more people up here because they built a sports stadium or something, right? That's what it's used for. This
And
idea
that's
that it's,
essentially what the issue is with the case, right? Is that they're like, well, we got him on King and Queen, and they can't put him on the intersection of King and Queen. But Cy Ray also can't necessarily take him off of it, but he can argue that they can't put him on it. Do I have that right in a nutshell?
yeah. So here's the way to look at all these cases involving timing advance. We know there's a mobile phone, right? We know that. We know Brian Koberg has a mobile phone. We know that he has a phone number assigned to that mobile phone. We know that you make a phone call on a cell tower or a data session on a cell tower, and we know where the cell tower is located, the physical structure, or it's strapped to the side of the building. All those things are facts. Those are like gravity. That can't be changed, right? It's exact facts. We know the date and time of that. What we don't know, and we know that the cell phone must be within the range of the cell tower, because otherwise you can't make a phone call.
The very broad range of the cell tower.
What we don't know is the range of the tower. We don't know where the tower's RF footprint is. Now, if you look at the cell industry, how do they figure that out? They go in the field and they test with cellular equipment. That's what they drive test for. They have a $400 billion industry with 10,000 drive testers in the field on a daily basis. This is what they do. That's what we do here. We go drive test. We drive test every single week for court cases, and we come in and tell the government, you're completely wrong. None of this looks like this. This is the real footprint. Because here's what happens. You got a triangle, and they go, well, there's the crime scene. There's nothing else near the crime scene. It's just right here, right? But if you look at the total RF footprint, it's the defendant's house, McDonald's, barber shop, everything else. And we go, look, based on the calling records, this defendant spends 85% of his life in that same cell tower range.
Okay.
But you're putting it so small that it looks like it just covers just the crime scene and a little bit more, right? You can't do that because that's prejudicial, that you're selling the jury on a story that's not correct, and then you're not giving it any information about what all that means. And what happens is you take a jury that doesn't know anything about cellular evidence, and they just assume that it's a nice little pretty triangle and that's all that there is. But what they'll talk about is they'll talk about sectors and stuff like that. I don't want to ever hear about sector in court ever again. Sectors mean nothing. It's a schematic. It means absolutely not a damn thing. I want to know about radio frequency footprint. And even if they go, well, isn't it true, Mr. Garrett, the cell tower broadcasts north? Yes, but it also broadcasts south, east, and west.
Yes.
Well, I mean, there's multiple antennas in the tower, correct? That's not what I meant. One single antenna broadcasts north, east, west, and south. So you cannot determine direction from the tower.
Okay.
So think about this. If timing advance, you got a cell tower pointed north, and their signal heading south hits a building and then comes back north, would your measurement be correct?
No.
No, it's not
So
possible.
what else that means is because the cell phone coverage is all around the actual tower and there is no directional no method of figuring out the directional based off what they've done here. What that means is that if the cell phone tower is here, I could be north or south, east or west, and they can't tell you if I'm east or west here or east or west here, and there is east or west approaching or west going away from the tower, and then
Absolutely.
there's north approaching and north going away from the tower. So it's also very based on if you're approaching or if you've passed the tower, like if that makes any sense.
There's another part of that too. So remember, your cell connects to the strongest signal. I don't care distance. Distance from a tower has nothing to do with it. Signal, right? So if I'm in a car and I'm heading east, okay, and there's a cell tower here I'm connected to, okay, while I'm here, I'm connected to this tower. And then when I'm here, I connect to this tower that's even further back.
Okay. And that's because your signal there is actually stronger than the signal that you might be approaching next.
There's a building in a way. So now that's a stronger signal.
Okay.
Because they overlap each other. Because this 700 megahertz tower, and it's a 2300 megahertz tower, so they're different sizes.
And that is the radio frequency that he is referring to, guys, just so that we know that.
Frequency. So the easy way to look at frequency is this. When I drive by your house with my car stereo on, which I don't have a big car stereo, by the way, but if I did, and I had big speakers and they're booming, you hear the bass in your house. You don't get to hear the hi-hats and tweeters. You hear just the bass, the boom, boom, boom. because it's a low frequency, has big waveform, goes through buildings, travels really far. The high frequencies, the hi-hats, tweeters, mid-range speakers, or higher frequencies, those have smaller waveforms, don't go very far, and they hit vegetation, trees, anything, they die. So if you have a cell antenna that's at 700 megahertz, it can have a theoretical footprint of almost 40 miles, usable footprint of about 28 and a half miles, unless you're on open water, and then it increases and you could be 50 miles offshore and still make a phone call. But 28 miles, and I just pulled up, I don't know if I showed you, but earlier the staying case. Let me look at reports and I'll pull it up. So let me pull this thing up and let's see here. Let me download this and I will zoom in and show it to you. You'll like this because this gives you an idea of how far out these things go. A 700 megahertz tower can be like 28, 30 miles easily. A 2300 megahertz tower is smaller, maybe 5 miles, right? So one's on top of the other. They're laid on top of each other. So here we go. Let me show you this. This is an actual case. Yesterday, this report got filed. So this is brand new. And let me go Windows, share. All right. See this right here?
Yep.
Right here to here is right at about, I think, 28 miles. This is the elevation scale down below. It's at 7,211 feet, and the crime scene sitting at 4,500. The cell's located in excess of 2,800 meters or feet, sorry, above the crime scene. Okay. So you're talking about, sorry, this one's 16 miles away. I'm saying correctly. 16 miles on a cell tower.
Okay.
Right here. And you could use it.
Like shit.
Absolutely use that cell tower.
Okay.
So this idea that cell towers are this small 3 or 4 mile footprint is just nonsense, right?
Okay.
Then same thing, if I take a look, this has timing advanced data in it. Let me show you the timing advanced data in this. Give me a second here. Let's go back. Okay. So if we take the timing advanced data in this, we can see here this ring here that's like this red ring out to the left.
Yep.
That's from the cell tower 16 miles away, and the other ones are from this tower over here. And the maximum usable is that outer ring. So why is one cell tower smaller than the other? Because this one operates on 456 megahertz, and the other one's at 792 megahertz.
Makes sense. That makes sense.
Absolutely. And that's why we see in a lot of these cases, we'll actually see the frequency listed with the call detail records, so we know what's the maximum footprint that can be used.
And why they should be included. Okay.
Yes. And when we're talking about areas of uncertainty, let me show you. Here is the OD. This is now letting out some secrets today. So here's, you know what this is? This is Qualcomm. This is the people that made the antenna on the cell tower. These are the manufacturer of the cell antenna. The actual antenna itself, breaking down timing advance, right? And then they talk about, there's some physics in this. This is not
I can see this is some complex
some pretty serious.
Yeah.
This is not a bunch of cops going, well, we measured it and it must be true because I got a signal there, right?
Absolutely not.
This is, you can see here, the area of uncertainty still from quantization, which basically means due to the frequency and the measurement, there's going to be a fudge factor, right? Because you got an uplink and downlink channel and there's a separation between the channels. But Between the uplink channel and the downlink channel, there's this area of uncertainty. But when we take a look at the E node Bs, which are the cell antennas themselves, there's 3 here to find out 911, right? That's where it's
Mhm.
at. But they're also talking about subframe synchronization, and like this stuff gets wicked technical. So they're, unfortunately, here's what happens. People read a single paper, they grab a hold of one paragraph and they say, it must be accurate because so and so said so. I would like to see that person, whoever says that, whoever, comments on the blog section of this stuff, they're going to get out there and they're going to make comments about this video too. And the world is so polarized, right? They're guilty, they're innocent, and everybody's fighting each other way. And I'm like, well, we don't get to assess innocent and guilt. We get to talk about science. Jury gets to assess innocence and guilt. And we don't even get to sway it one way. If we were in there trying to like advocate for the prosecution or advocate for the defense, the judge would shut me down in 5 seconds. I would be off the witness stand. They'd throw you out.
Right.
We have to talk about science.
Right.
And when we're talking about this stuff, unfortunately, there's just a lot of people that read this stuff and they read it like in a vacuum and they read this much and all of a sudden they're the experts in it. And I'm like, well, clearly you would never survive on a witness stand because you could puke out two sentences from some white paper, but you have to be able to stand behind it and explain the physics and the math.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them just can't. So there is all this stuff. I mean, this stuff is very well. I mean, take a look. It talks about the error factors and GDOP phenomenon. This is the actual manufacturer. You can't argue with it, right? And
Right.
then they talk about, the error ratios. You get further away from the cell tower.
Yeah.
That's why they say don't use this over 1,000 meters from a cell tower. That's actually published.
Okay, that
in the
explains
FPS.
that really well, because it's not just that this is ranging data, it's that the range is actually like variant based on how far away from the cell tower you get. It gets greater. Okay.
We'll take a look at here too.
I didn't catch
And
that.
everybody says, well, multipath fixes it. No, multipath doesn't fix it. Actually, if you read these papers, multipath does not help. Line of sight means the most, but how do you know if you have 2 multipath measurements that are bouncing off 2 buildings to get to the phone and then a straight line of sight? It's going to average them together and you're going to be somewhere in here. You're not going to be here.
Oh my gosh. And then I guess when I was looking at, when I was thinking through this entire thing, I just want to point this out. I factored in diffraction. I did not factor in reflection and, it projecting back onto its own self. Like oh my God. Okay.
Yeah, that's why this can't be. This is not as simple as, now the government is in this big scramble right now. They went and they tapped on a bunch of people's shoulders and said, hey, prove this up, prove this for us, go out and do this. So they've been pinging on people and even pinging on authors of books, and they're sending them data sets, and the data sets they're sending them are from 911. They're going to be accurate because it's a
That makes
911
sense. Right.
system. Because they go, well, the customer called in or the client called in and, says 911, I need help. My husband got injured in the backyard. I need some help. And they go, okay. And they fire off the 911 system. They triangulate it based on 3 timing advance records. And they find a fixed position. And let's say it's a farmhouse. Then they ask the person, where do you live? And they go, well, I live at 2042 Mommy Lane. And I go, okay. So they take the timing advance data and they take the recorded phone call that said Mommy Lane, because they put in the address in there too, right? In the call. Government is taking all that data from the timing advance and putting the addresses with it, and they took all the ones that matched, and that's what they're running around peddling right now. They're peddling that data to say, well, why don't you go validate this data as being accurate? And now they're saying, well, timing advance is 97% accurate because look at this data we validated from all these 911 phone calls. Well, yeah, it is. If you pick the 97% that match the address, of course it is. And that's what's happening right now. And I'm warning the people in the industry that are being tapped on the shoulder to review this data. Do not buy into this crap. Don't let them. You need your own data. The problem is, how do you go to a cell carrier and say, I need the data that you won't give anybody, you won't testify about, you won't talk about the patents or how it works or the methodologies, and somehow I need it so I can prove that it actually works. Look, Federal Rules Evidence 702 are clear for us experts. It's got to be, one, it's got to be based on scientific principles. It's got to be generally accepted by the scientific community. I have to be able to have expert knowledge in that area. Okay. And you have to be competently be able to testify. In other words, you haven't been dauberted before where they throw you out for junk science. And then I have to present my training and education. And every single time I go in court, the prosecution gets to challenge me or the defense gets to challenge me. I work on both sides. And they get to say, this guy's not an expert. And then the judge makes a decision whether you are or not.
Right.
That's
Yep.
the way it works. I don't get a free pass just because I read something out of a book. I have to go in there. And I just testified in Peoria, Illinois about timing events maybe 5 weeks ago. And that's exactly what they did. And the prosecution asked 100 questions. And then the judge said, stop. He's an expert. Move on. And that's it. That's the way it works. Once the judge makes a decision, they must move on and start asking you substantive questions about the case.
Yep.
Before that, they get to challenge you on everything. You better have the training and the materials and everything with you so you can pull it out and support basically your master's thesis. That's the way it works.
I like it. Okay.
It's a tough job. I mean, imagine writing your master's thesis every day and getting graded every
Right.
day.
Right.
That's our job. And we love it, and we're not always right? You know, we've been wrong in the past and we've corrected the record and said, I was wrong. I made a bad call. Here it is. I will correct the record and I will do what's right. And we've done that a few times in my life. Thank God it hasn't been a lot. It's just a few times where we got something wrong. And usually it's because we weren't given all the data. Right. We get sandbagged with something last minute. And I go, well, that totally changes my report. You know, I need to take that into consideration now. We write a supplemental report and correct the record.
Yep. And that's not just for you. That's just standard. That's just what expert witnesses do when they realize that they weren't given everything or that they had something wrong. So
good ones do. Bad
That's
ones
right.
will double down and say
That's
something
right.
bad,
Good
and then
ones.
they get
Good ones
beat up
do.
on the witness stand, or they make something up. I mean, we've seen some experts lately. You've got the whole that are getting crucified in the news over allegedly. I'm gonna say allegedly. You know, falsifying credentials. You got Karen Reed case. You have the Lanterman situation up in Minnesota where they, you know, saying got a degree from Harvard, and they're just coming after these guys that just make stuff up.
Yeah.
And I think the difference is this, though. I think for us that do some defense work, the standard is different. For law enforcement, if they get up there and they're going to screw something up, the defense team's like, go ahead and let them, right? Like, we want them to testify where they mess it up or they put something on the record that's completely wrong, because then you got to bring in the defense expert to clean it up.
Yep.
If the prosecution will always try to take out the defense expert, so there's no defense in the case. So you want bad experts that work for the prosecution. You won't want any expert that works for the defense. So it's a much different standard. So every case we go into, if you're working for the prosecution, unless they know you're going to say something really helpful to the prosecution, they'll let you say whatever. The judge will let you say whatever. They'll stipulate to you being an expert. Go ahead, puke out whatever you want in the record that's untrue. We'll clean it up on the defense. But for a defense expert, they don't even get on the witness stand with having literally almost like a full-blown hearing about whether they're credentialed enough to do it.
Makes sense.
So it's tough. Yeah.
Makes sense.
So that's why they say, well, so-and-so's testified 45 times to the prosecution. That means zero to me, zero, because they get a free pass in every case just to testify. They stick them up there and they say, you're an expert. Okay, go ahead. And let me show you what the standard is, because I think you'll be surprised. The standard for testifying, and let me show you the actual. Now, nobody's ever seen this, probably. You're it. Like, everybody has. This is the standard. There's the book. Okay. Now, notice it's 46 pages long. Now, I'm just going to show you a peek at this. Take a look at this. Basic cellular theory. That's it. That's the only training they have on how cell towers work.
Okay.
12 minutes.
And we've heard about this before. Yeah.
Now that's for the 2-day training class that most cops go to. That is not the full-blown CAS program. The full-blown CAS program is physics and it's science and it is real. The problem is the data from that course they are not using in court. And if you take a look at this student workbook, the rest of this is about how to plot dots on a map. None of it
explains how this comes to be cops teaching other cops bad science. That makes sense. That it just comes together and makes sense.
Yeah. Now the real cast program is 1,600 slides long. It's intense physics. It is made for engineers. We've attended that same course. I hired the same instructors that cast contracts with from Florida Institute of Technology. I hired them to teach us the same exact course by contract. Same course, same seats, same building, same pens and paper, every single slide, everything. They gave it to me day one, what they teach the FBI. And I said, I want you to run the exact same course. So when we go to court, we can say we've attended the exact same training.
That's right.
Now, I brought cell engineers with us, and they already knew all that stuff, right? They didn't need the class. But I can tell you that it was surprising because some of the stuff in that class is not what is being said in court. And what's really interesting is the professors that teach it said they've never seen a court case. They were told to never look at one.
That is interesting.
They teach RF theory and then they walk away.
Okay.
And there's a great deposition to read. It's by Robert Blythe, and it was let's see here. It is in state of Florida versus Omar Rodriguez Ortiz, in which Mr. Special Agent Blythe discloses, yes, it's not 120 degrees. You could be 360 degrees, and the cell towers still communicate with it. And he basically puts on the record everything that we're saying today, along with a bunch of others. There's Kennedy's cross-examination in the Nathan Shane Detroit case. There's the Etheridge case. There's a bunch where FBI officers actually shot it straight and said what it is and didn't spin it. Lots of those. Even the guy who actually created this science is a guy named Special Agent William Shute. Okay. Now, William Shute in the Taekwon Atkinson trial is said, and let me see if I can pull it up here. He said, when asked who made this up, he said, I did. Under what scientific basis? I don't have one. It just works. Right from the guy who designed it, the first FBI cast agent in the whole world.
Nice.
And that is very, very public. Now, let me tell you the outcome of that case. That is a case where a young man was accused of shooting the top police commander's son of Philadelphia PD in broad daylight with 17 witnesses and videos. There is no world in which I thought anybody would walk into a courtroom and find this kid innocent. That just wasn't an option. But they decided to use cell evidence to place him at the park, which they did not need. They had witnesses. They didn't need it. So by taking that cell evidence, they got beat up on the witness stand so badly, the jury walked him.
Wow.
It can hurt.
Well, that's quite a bit to digest.
Lesson learned.
So those were my questions.
I just think that in the Koberger case, they need to get some competent people in there. And I think Cy Ray probably is competent. I think he has a lot to say that he can't say based on a lot of people would look at past reports he's written and come back and have his lunch over it, right? Once you're committed to one thing, you can't back out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of like stuck. As an expert, they pull, you're required what's called an Elkins list. I'm required to submit a listing of every report I've ever written for any case to the prosecution, and they go pull them and they go read them and they analyze them.
And they
you better be
comparatively make sure that you remain consistent in your opinion and that you're not giving with the same set of facts this opinion for one side in this case versus this opinion that's opposing for the other side in another case. And that actually is the checks and balances for making sure that you're not a paid expert who's just doing what you're paid for.
If you're a hired gun, you're going to get weeded out pretty quick. But my industry is filled with 95% ex-cops. Forensic experts are 95% ex-cops. So They went to the same 2-day school
Right.
that taught the same bad stuff. So they don't know any better, right? I don't hold them completely accountable, but I do in a way. I mean, so we ask all the time, what other materials have you read? What research papers? I haven't read any. I don't know any. I've never looked at another white paper. I just got taught this in a 2-day class. Okay. That's it.
And the fact that this is your training is not necessarily your fault, but staring in the face of an alternative truth and being in denial is your fault. So there's the balance for that. So
So we mail this to the police when they're going to testify. We actually mail them the book, and then we tab it out, and we tab out sections that show cell phones and all the physics, and we give it to them before they get on the witness stand. They usually panic because we actually send them the college textbooks, forensic radio surveys, techniques, and cell site analysis, and that's the proper thing to do, because they get an opportunity to see how wrong they are. And I would rather them know than get on the witness stand. Here's the deal. I just want them to get it right. We all do, right? Truth coming out is good. So when they get this,
we tabbed it out for them. Literally, that brought tears to my eyes. That was hilarious. I'm sorry.
We literally
tabbed it out.
Yep, we tab this whole thing out. We put tabs of everywhere in their report how they're wrong. And here's timing advance too. It's in here, right? These are the textbooks. We send this to them. We buy these things in bulk, right? And we send them to them, and we're like, hey, by the way, here's the textbook of what you're talking about that they've never read anything about, right? They've never read any of this stuff ever. They have no idea. And here's when I say the best coverage area, there's the bore site and the antenna, and it shows like what the main lobe looks like. All the stuff's in here, right? It's very detailed. And it's hard to read. This is physics. This is a pretty hardcore engineering book. But what they do is they read it, and for the first time probably in history, they're thinking somebody above me sold me a bill of goods, and I've been on the witness stand testifying. And then they look at their command and they go, do not put me on the witness stand. I am not testifying about this. These guys are going to crucify me in my career. And I get it. But you know what? Shame on you for never picking up another book, right? So I had a gal, and I'm just going to say her name, Lindsay Rojas. Okay. Officer, 9 years, been doing cell work in Orlando, Florida. Lindsay, we put her now we get depositions in Florida, which is great, because in criminal cases, depositions are great because you can ferret something out for 5-6 hours that you can't do at a trial. You ain't get that much time. Judge will move you along fast. And I asked her, when did you go to training on this? Well, I went to training in, 2020, January 2020. How long was the training? Well, it took a little time. No, how long was the training? Was it 2 days? Yes. Who taught it? We go through that. All of a sudden, we established it 2 days. When's the first time you testified about call detail records after you took the training? The Monday afterwards. Monday afterwards. So you took a 2-day training class, and you're now an expert the Monday afterwards. Mm-hmm. And my question to her, and I'll be glad to give you the transcript from the deposition, was, because I'm typing and the attorney's reading like a teleprompter, right? When I say my question to her, I'm not the attorney asks question, but I type and they read. Mm-hmm. That's the way a lot of depositions work, is you have an expert typing your questions for you as an attorney. So, and he asked, what's your knowledge of a cell tower? Her response was, I've driven by one.
Oh, so I know what
this cannot be 9 years of doing this for the government, and you've driven by one. What papers and white papers do you have that you've ever read? I remember I saw one online one time. That was the answer.
Like, do you remember where you saw that online?
There's no knowledge. This is like the DNA machine spit out a report that says positively identified this person, and you just run with it, and you have no idea how DNA works, right? That's what our government is doing, and we have to hold our government to a higher standard. Period.
I totally understand.
It's too many innocent people go to jail. I don't know if Brian Cover is innocent or guilty. That's for a jury to decide, not me. But I do know the science is being used on both sides. They need to get it together and get it right.
And they better call it. Yep. So that was what I was thinking that we were kind of telling me the first time around, is that, look, nobody's got their ducks in a row. But I think that people kind of honed in on just the idea that the prosecution doesn't have their ducks in a row, but nobody
No,
does.
no. Nobody has their ducks in a row. They need to hire a competent people. They need to hire cell engineers to come in and say what this is. And the easy way is go drive test. It builds an RF map, and the answer is you're either in or outside the coverage. That's it. That's all you can say. You can't say within that coverage where you're at. You're more likely than not here or there. Can't do that.
Not using the cell phone information. What you need to
Not
do
using
from
any
there,
information. Like you can't do that. You can't. The coverage is here. You're either in the coverage or you're out of the coverage. There's no information to say where
no.
after the coverage
My
you're at.
My question is based off cell phone analysis in general, right? As an umbrella. That's if you want to be more specific as to where someone is, you do want something like a trigger going on in the Google account
Oh
or
yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. That's
Well,
going
you don't need cell tower evidence then. If I have a trigger from GPS that says here's your GPS coordinate because that's where you started driving from grandma's house to your house,
Mhm.
I don't need cell evidence. Why would I introduce it in a case? It's a complete waste of time. But here's what happens. Here's why. I call the FBI cast magicians. Okay, it's kind of a funny. We just say it around here, and I'm friends with some of them. Actually, I know a couple of their blue badges very well. That means they're FBI agents without holding a gun and badge. They're like PhD professors, right? They're like highly educated people at the very top. And we all talk. We're all friends. They think that sometimes FBI cast thinks they've got a tight lid on everything they do. They do not. I mean, they have plenty of people that are talk to people and friends with people, and they talk about these things and they research these things and studies. And I mean, here's the whole deal: is I call them magicians because they have been used as the golden children for a long time to come into court and talk about this cell phone evidence, and here's the triangle, and the crime scene's here, and look, there's a red dead body there, and they like paint this picture in the jury's mind, right? Because if we take a look, and now this is where I get to show you. I'm going to show you why I call them magicians, and you'll understand here in a second. Here, so let's go to one of their reports. Right. All right, let's pull this up. Now I'm going to go to the very beginning of this. Okay, here's the disclosure. Now, let's critically take a look at this. Will testify cellular records a target device between this and this interacted with the below cell towers. Okay, there's dots on a map. You interacted with cell towers. What does that mean? That doesn't mean much.
right.
That the cell towers, the target device connected to these cell towers at these times. Okay, so you got a pattern of life where somebody went to. There's no argument there. That's pretty simple, right? Okay, so what do you get out of that? Now nothing so far.
Yes, it's empty.
Absolutely, just a bunch of nonsense.
Okay.
You might as well go to McDonald's, order a hamburger. Yeah, nothing here. It's like there's not like. So then we go down here. Introduction. Here's the cell tower. Here's a picture of a cell tower. Notice it's marked draft. Notice that. And this has already been to trial. Like it's still in draft format. Here's what sectors are. Okay. And notice how each sector. Look at the language. Each sector covers approximately 120 degrees. Yes, but we're not talking about cell phone coverage, radio frequency coverage. You're talking about a sector, which is a schematic. Neighboring cell towers aid in the estimation of coverage areas of respective sectors. Okay, we know that can't be true based on the overlapping stuff in the reports I've shown you. That can't be true. And second of all, show me in this report how the neighboring cells were calculated in to determine the actual radio frequency footprint of one antenna. Do you think the cell carrier looks at the neighboring cells? Yes, they do for overlap, but that's about it. And take a look here. There's no coverage listed there. There's just triangles. And you know what's not in this report? An opinion. There's no opinion as to where the phone's at. There's no opinion as to the coverage. This is what they do. They build a demonstrative aid, which is called FRE 1006. It's a summary exhibit of voluminous data, but there's no opinions. You are required by law to provide an opinion. They don't.
Okay.
They show up to court and get to say whatever they want in front of a jury to sell the jury. You need to provide an opinion. Where was the phone at the date and time of the crime? Is it in this RF pattern or is it not? Is it in the sector or it's not? And the reason they'll provide an opinion is because they're unsure. If they were sure, they would be like every other police report we've ever written. We believe the defendant was doing A, B, and C at the time of the crime. And all of this, there's never an opinion.
Yes.
That tells you a lot about what's going on over there. So that's why I say they're magicians. They want to show these things to the jury and let the jury work it out in their own head. They don't want to explain what any of this means. They just draw. It's like drawing a dead body on the ground. Instantly, a jury assumes there's a dead body on the ground. I go, no, that's not a dead body. That's the water pattern on the ground I drew. Okay, see the difference? It's a magician. Like, look over here, and I'll do something else over here in this hand, right and left hand, right? It's sleight of hand.
The Koberger case here, I just want to make sure for clarity, the phone was off, so there's nothing to debate here.
Yeah, there's no signal. You can't have signal from a phone that's off.
And from my understanding, the phone was like manually shut off. So there's nothing to even debate here. And yet, because of the before the crime activity, 2 hours before, and then I guess 4:48 when the phone came on and he signed into Google or whatever, the murders happened in between there. So we're actually debating right now through cell phone information, the before and the after, but not the time of the murders because the phone was off. Okay.
Yep.
That I wanted to make sure that we were clarifying that as well.
Same scenario in the Maxwell Anderson murder case. We have that case too. So same thing. Phone was off, right? It died, and then it got power got added to it, and then it booted back up 4 hours later. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Phone was off. Now, when the phone turned back on, it appeared as if he was using Facebook and everything while the phone was off, because those databases are unified. Somebody sends you a message on Facebook at 2:00 in the morning. When you turn your phone off at 4 in the morning, turn your phone on at 5 a.m., that message comes to your phone as if it came in at 2:00 in the morning.
Okay.
So you could get things really off quick. You got to look at where that data actually came from.
Okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense. So those were my questions as far as cell phone analysis goes. It has been an hour and 20 minutes, and I don't really want to hold you up anymore.
Nah, it's all right.
So
I appreciate it. It's I like talking about it. I like people so they understand. I mean, we are not an advocate for one side or the other. We're an advocate of just the science, right? And I just see that a lot is going on. I think, to sum up, I think Cy Rape knows a lot. I think he can shed a lot of light on it, but I don't think the reports he's written so far do any justice at all. It just throws shade on a bunch of stuff that will never see the courtroom. The judge is never going to let any of that in. That'd be my take on it. Judge is going to say, why is all this shade relevant to this case, right? If you want to make an accusation, make an accusation. Now, basically, in a way, saying, hey, the government gets all this data they don't want people to know about. They're keeping it super secret, and they probably had it, and we don't have it. I see a bunch of that stuff going on. But to be honest, the whole amoeba shape thing doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
That is a generic depiction of a single radio antenna radio pattern from one radio manufacturer of saying this is what it looks like kind of on the ground. That doesn't work well, and that's what got thrown out of many courts, and using just this generic shape. And the IEEE was kind of really down on that kind of stuff too, saying that because every cell antenna operates completely different from each other. Every make and model is different.
Yeah, and they're speaking about it as if these are like standardly like put together and then deconstructed to be moved to the site, and then just always put together the same exact way with the same exact angles. And I totally get it. They're using it as if these are standardized, like
yeah, that can't be true. I mean, you're down, every 4G antenna is downward tilted anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So based on your downward tilt, it changes the pattern. It's like a flashlight against the wall is a perfect circle. You start moving it down, it's oblong. Plus, even if you had an antenna here and tilted it down, there's no coverage right underneath the cell antenna. The radio signal doesn't hit down, it goes out towards the horizon or below. So it's never going to look like that. They're not standardized at all whatsoever. What they do is they go in the field and people go out and drive test. They design it, they build it, they use RF propagation modeling, they model it out, they go they build the tower, then they go test for the FCC, and then they tune that antenna manually or electronically. They got electronic tilt or manual tilt, and they tune it, and then they tune some software stuff and everything, and then they cut the cord and they're done. They walk away.
Okay.
But every cell tower, if it was the same, those maps I showed you earlier would all match. They
Makes
would all be
sense.
the exact same.
Yep, that makes sense.
And
And
none of
again,
them are the same.
from
Like,
our
none
first
of them.
conversation, I recall you telling me that it depends. You know, if it's a smaller town, then, you know, they tilt those differently. If it's a larger area and they need more, like, you know, a lot more space, they sometimes have more than one antenna covering the same exact area and stuff like that. So I remember talking about how different just where the tower is even going to be and what coverage is necessary in that area, how different that can make towers as well.
Or a distributed antenna system, a DAS system that's in a building. So you don't build a cell antenna on the side of a building and shoot it through the building. You get RF burn. The secretary in the corner would have a nice red face in the side of their, every day, because that stuff will burn you. Instead, they put antennas inside the building that broadcast down, but they also broadcast outside the building some. So you could be using a DAS system that's inside the building and not even know it. Everything's got a cell ID. And especially if you're in a city, I've seen antennas pointed at a building to bounce off the building, to go around another building, to go south.
Intentionally, yeah.
So it's an antenna facing north to put signal south.
So where I live, we don't have a lot of like super tall buildings. I live in a medium-sized city, but we do strap them in our downtown area on top of the building and intentionally point them down at a smaller building so that the refractment is off the shorter building. And yeah, so I've just driving around in my inner city area, I see things like that all the time.
All the time. Like that is, and let alone there's, I mean, to give you, and I think this is a really good example, then I think we'll be all done for the day probably. But let me show you, let me go here. Let me see if I can find, I'm gonna find CDRs. Here we go. Sample CDR data. Okay, T-Mobile. Let's take LTE, and let me open this up. So on a weekly basis, the cell carriers, or even monthly basis, they submit to the government a list of all their cell towers. Okay. They submit a ton of data with that too. So there's a bunch of data that comes with just the location of the tower. They even give you the frequency it operates on. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let me pull this up. It's opening right now. Pretty close. I'm going to show you an entire city's list of all their cell towers.
Okay.
And you'll get a fond appreciation of how many there are, because you'll be surprised. What they're plotting on a map is not how many there are, because if they plotted them all, there would be no white space left behind on the map between the dots. There's
okay.
a lot. One second.
That makes sense too, because there's something going on in this case. So I feel like I found way more cell phone towers than they said there were. But you froze.
It's being slow.
Oh, we're back.
I'm back. Okay, yeah, I was being slow. It's a big spreadsheet. Okay, so let's share this. And all righty. Okay, so here's Albuquerque. Here's the cell ID. Here's latitude, longitude. That's the physical location of cell tower. Here's the azimuth.
Mm-hmm.
Now remember, azimuth is the direction it's facing, right?
Yep.
Here's the beam width. Now this is based on what's called a -3 dB beam width, which means that's the best coverage area beam width. Now let's sort from largest to smallest for this, and then let's take a look. 360 degrees, I don't know, 70 degrees, 80 degrees. Now this is half, so you have to double it, right? Unless it's 360, you have to double it.
Mm-hmm.
So those are 160 degrees is 140. And guess what? So when they took 120 degrees, anything over 60 degrees would be 120, right? 85,670 cell towers that break their model. That's not even, they're so far off, it's crazy. And one's under 120 degrees out of let me see what the total is. We have 104,000. Sorry, let me go back up here. We have 988,000 plus cell towers. Now, those are cells, those are antennas, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are all cell antennas.
Mm-hmm.
If I take in here beam width and I go and I say, hey, I'm only interested in less than, okay, let's just take 65, which is 130 degrees.
Okay.
So we take this to here, 503,000, less than 50% of the state would even be close or under. Now, if we take 120, let's even filter, let's do it in between, because some of these, so let's take a 65 and let's do a swag at 55, right? Hold on. It's not liking what I did. Between is less than 65 is greater than or equal to 55. That would be better. Okay. 384,675 could be considered close to 120 out of the million towers. That's 38%.
Yeah.
Now, this is what really surprised. If I just take it then less than, let's say, 30, there's 50,000 towers that have less than 30 degrees. That means it's a ribbon cell. It'll go up and down the interstate. 30 degrees. Tiny.
Okay.
The reason they do that, think about this. I'm flying on Sunday to Bozeman, Montana. I'm heading down to Jackson, Wyoming, taking a little vacation. And when you're in Jackson Hole and you head north through the Teton Mountains to Yellowstone,
Mm-hmm.
on the right and left-hand side of the interstate there, buffalo. There's no farm. There's no power. There is cell antennas up and down the interstate, but there's nothing else. Why would a cell carrier broadcast RF to the buffalo? They don't use cell phones. There's no buffalocellphone.com. There's no such thing.
Right.
So they don't use cell phones. They
so
use
they
ribbon
funnel it all
cells.
toward where cell phones
Funnel
would
it
be,
really
which is
small
traveling up and down the highway. That
up
makes
and down the interstate. You're following me. So the idea of where you're at, where Brad Koberg's at in the world, I'd be really surprised if those weren't ribbon cells to begin with.
Okay.
Because why would you broadcast to the side of a mountain?
Okay.
Would make
That
sense.
makes sense.
But we don't know that. That's why we go test. I don't want to speculate. We go test. And that is now I could pull up any city and take a look at their tower list like that. Memphis, Tennessee has about 26,000 cell towers just downtown. And those are small cell sites layered. I mean, sometimes there's 30 antennas on one, so it's 30 at a time, all over the place. So, but I won't keep you. I appreciate you having me on. I think this is great. I appreciate you diving into this because people need to know. I know people are polarized one way or the other on, on this stuff. I always say is do the research, go out. I hope the government and I hope the defense both get it right.
Yeah.
And if they both had it right, they wouldn't be in polar opposites of each other right now. They would be
That
on the same
makes
page.
sense. Yep. That makes sense. And I really do. I am totally interested in this. And I just, first of all, I take an interest in just the justice system to begin with. I did my, way before my master's, I did my, it was called my action research paper when it was my bachelor's degree, but it was my final paper for my bachelor's degree on reforming the actual juvenile justice system. So it's not just that I'm, nitpicking at Brian Koberger's case or anything like that. It's just what I'm into and what I like to do. If there's something wrong, I want to fix it. So
That's just people ask me, and I'm like, I don't know a lot about the case except these few things. That's it. Because we work on so many high profile cases. We're involved in so much on a daily basis. I have no idea. I mean, we have 426 cases open right now. We're busy, right?
Yeah.
And this is not Brian Koberger, although it gets a lot of media attention, is not the biggest case on our deck. There are much larger cases, much uglier things,
And crazy shit literally happens
crazy
every
stuff.
day. Yeah.
Like when you got 11 dead bodies dropped in the middle of the jungle in South America, and I've got 32 Hondurans on a boat and 4,100 kilos of cocaine on a boat. Yeah, that's a much larger case and more complex with a bunch of players involved, and hitmen and cartel and
I
sex
totally
crimes and
understand.
murder, and like it in the big grand scheme of things for laboratories to do this type of work. It is not the biggest case in the deck, but it's the sexiest one on TV, which is doesn't necessarily mean it gets all the attention. So these forensic people that are working on this, although the state is working on this, honestly has cases that are probably getting lots more attention internally because they have a much more profound impact on the community as a whole. But this is a heinous crime. They want justice. They're going to get justice. It's all going to come out in court. But what I don't want is all the stuff to get thrown out because some judge goes, "Hey, look, you can't answer the simple questions about this evidence. I'm not going to let it in."
Absolutely.
And that's bound to happen. Cy Ray is going to eventually. I have a feeling he's holding back, and he's going to punch him in their chin at trial, right?
Yeah. And Mr.
Because he doesn't.
Hippler really does seem like the kind of guy who, if there's bullshit, he's going to cut it. So,
Well, he was in their shop with the bullshit every day, right? I mean, he knows it. It's kind of like, no, the secrets. You can
yep.
use them against people. And I think there's this whole big battle when it comes to this kind of stuff, and lots of people are getting involved and talking about this. And the Scientific Working Group for Digital Forensic Evidence just got eviscerated by the scientific community, saying you've been jaded by law enforcement to put this stuff into some standard document, and none of this is correct. Like, this stuff is just horribly wrong, and there's so much to be said about this that needs to be taken into consideration. So there's a bunch going on in this area, but I wish the family well, because this is horrible for them to have to deal with. But and if Mr. Koberger's innocent, hey, I wish him well too, right? You don't know. But I do know the world's polarized, right? People have already taken sides without knowing the evidence, but that's just the way it is. That's what makes good TV.
Yep.
Like,
true.
we all
right,
enjoy
well,
the crime channels and your channel and everybody's podcasts and stuff. We all enjoy it. But at the end of the day, the trial's the final swan song, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it all
Oh,
comes
yeah.
out.
So before I let you go, I just want to ask you one more question. It will seem a little bit long-winded, but I promise your answer is opinionated, so it can just be a simple yes or no. Okay? So we were
You
referred
asked
to
like
that.
an attorney.
What was that?
You asked like an attorney. I just want the yes or no. I don't want
Really, I promise, because it's an opinion question, and I don't
No.
really want you to have to like throw in conjecture or anything like that. I know that you're an actual professional, so a yes or no will do. We talked about Brian potentially wiping his phone, right? Using this high-end wiping software. And now we know from the judge that he was in fact using digital forensic tools to wipe his phone. So I want to give you a bit of information and then just ask you.
What tool did they say he used?
They did not say.
Because
so what I
don't
know is
of any
that
forensic tools to wipe phones. Like, I don't even know that one exists.
that was going to be one of my questions about that, but we didn't get to it.
Okay,
so that's
go ahead.
Okay. But just listen, I just want to ask you real quick, because I think I'm building something here in my thoughts, but I just want to know if you would agree or not. So we have 3 detectives or special agents or whatever. So we have Mr. Mowry from Moscow Police Department. He looked at cell phones. We have Mr. Urig, who is with Idaho Falls State Police. He was former USSS. He looked at computers. We have Special Agent Tanzola, who I believe looked at both and would be the person who originally saw the Instagram connection that everyone is now saying they cannot find. And then we have digital forensic experts for the state. The Barnharts, I believe they're a couple. And they are going to come in and talk about how on Brian's work computer and his cell phone, there are gaps where he did use digital forensic tools to wipe away things from his phone. If all of those things come together in that way, do you see where they might be building why they can't find the social media connection? Because I think that that could come together to kind of draw the jury a picture of, we know there was a social media connection. We had one officer. Still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh my God,
froze
total power outage for a second there.
That's all right.
That just freaked me out so bad. I didn't know what was even happening. Okay. So we just have, to me, it just seems like they're building something there. It seems like the FBI was putting in a lot of preservations originally. Like they may have known about the social media connection, but then the officers can't find it in the cell phone or in the computer. But the digital forensics experts say that there are things that have been wiped from his phone and computer, and that it is during critical times when he should have been being a student and a TA. So there shouldn't be nothing, but there is nothing. So I'm wondering if you might also agree that they could be building a story to explain why they can't find the social media connection. And maybe that's why everyone in court is saying there isn't one. And maybe they're going to explain it.
So there's always a language barrier between forensic experts and attorneys, right? So what I'm reading here is it says that Heather and Jared Barnhart. And by the way, I have a lot of respect for Heather Barnhart. She's a great forensic examiner. She teaches to Cellbrite. I know her well. We talk on LinkedIn once in a while.
I love that.
Here at the
That makes me
conferences,
happy.
I mean, we're all professionals. I mean, they don't work. Cellbrite traditionally has not done like testimony work for law enforcement ever. This is all new to them. But I can tell you what's good. So here's the whole abnormal gaps in Koberger's digital activity may, and it said the prosecutor may suggest that means deleted data or anti-forensic behavior. It could, but you need to come with proof of that, right? You need to come and say, hey, here's the anti-forensic tool. It's kind of like just because Brian Koberger turned his phone off, he's now not all of a sudden a guilty person. If that's the case, we're all guilty.
He's not immediately concealing his location.
No, like it doesn't mean I'm concealing stuff because I turned my phone off. Sometimes I just don't want you to call me. Like I'm like, hey, I don't want a phone call. I want to unplug, or I'm getting in the pool, don't want my phone ringing, and the kid's grabbing it and turn on, and then they drop it in the water. I just like leave it alone, right? Turned off. So I think that's going to be a big gap to fill in testimony. Here's the problem. Here's the actual danger in what's going on for the prosecution. And I'm going to be flat and honest. When you start calling companies like Cellbrite or Magnet or anything, and you ask their internal people to testify, you could possibly undermine the credibility of your tool if things go badly for you, which all law enforcement uses. Number two, you have to explain the financial relationship between the two. And if these companies are doing it for free, they're going to get looked at like hired guns. Because my understanding is there is, and I'm not going to say Cellbrite's doing this, but I do know another company that is calling the most famous cases out there to try to get their people involved so they can get headlines.
Got it.
They're using it as a PR strategy.
Got it.
That is bad because that induces bias. I don't think Heather, I've known her, she's got an ethical backbone. I don't think she'd do it. But to me, there's no compelling reason for Cellbrite to even be involved, right? There's a whole industry of forensic experts you can hire from that are just as qualified, that you don't have to tap on the software company that makes the software. I think what it is the government's trying to build validity by saying, well, there's 100,000 people that use a software tool, so the person that works for the company must have the credibility of 100,000 people. That's going to bite them. Any defense attorney worth his salt is going to exploit that. And here's what's going to happen. They're going to say, you relied upon, and this is what I think they'll do. They'll say, Miss Barnhart, you relied upon Cellbrite software. Is that correct? Yes. You relied on it to parse through the data. Is that correct? Does Cellbrite software have any issues or flaws with it? Yes, it has. Can you pull up the 10,800 tickets you've had of flaws in the software? And I want them all on our table in 48 hours to explain all the flaws in your software. Now they're going to pit, they have to pit. The scrutiny becomes the scrutiny on the software. Now, the expert could say, well, I used the software to find it, but then I also validated it manually, right? They could say that, but that still doesn't absolve them of discovery into things they don't want to get into, especially their relationship with government. When they're trying to say, hey, do you guys build tools for government that allows them to remotely spy on cell phones? See the problem?
I do.
They're going, any defense attorney worth his salt that understands technology, has a good expert behind it, is going to absolutely exploit these people to every end to show that them and government are best friends. And if you look at some of Cellbrite's tools like Premium and stuff like that, they refused sale to anybody except government for 15 years. Their only client was government. So
Yeah.
it looks like government hiring government, but
Mhm.
trying to use a software company as wrap around. Now, they're not the only ones doing this, right? There's a bunch of others doing this too. And actually, one of the software companies involved actually put Mr. Burgess's name in the hat in the Karen Reed trial, and then he got filleted on the witness stand. So this is not working out well. These defense attorneys will dig into these people's lives, every inch of their life, everything they've done. They'll ask for every email saying there's a flaw in the software, who they talked to, what communication they had about the Brian Koberger case. And if they find for a minute that the government tapped on their door and says, hey, we could get you a bunch of PR and trade for a bunch of work, they're going to go down for it. And it's going to be a bad day for everybody. So I would say is, if this thing has any cracks in this whatsoever and wasn't 100% above board, it's going to come out. And that's going to be a bad day. Why would you take a software company worth $40 billion and put it under jeopardy of one person's testimony? And I think
Right.
Heather Barnhart is competent. I think she'll testify well. I think she's good at what she does. But you're also hanging a case that's polarized between people that hate you and love you, all underneath something that a software company doesn't have to be involved in. They don't. They dominate the market. Why even get involved? So I always look at it like, don't get involved. Right.
Okay.
Step away from it. And I think that's what's going to happen. I mean, if any defense expert I know would do exactly that.
Okay.
I mean, defense legal team would do that. They would dig into their lives, dig into the software. And if they dig into the software, they're going to find, like, I think there was, like, last I knew, there was like 10,000 support tickets built just last year of issues in the software. And then they're going to say to the court,
as
and the
with
court,
anything, because we all conduct quality assurance, obviously, so that we can correct issues if we're interested in that.
well,
And
think about this.
if you have any kind of Q&A system, there's going to be issues. They're going to be accumulative. I'm sure you're not just making one issue, every once in a while. There's not one problem per month. So yeah, they're going to find
So next,
treasure trove.
you get a next case law enforcement has, they get a cop that knows how to push buttons in software, but he doesn't know the science behind it, right? Because most of them don't. They get taught how to use the software in a 2-day class, 3-day class, and they don't know the forensics behind it. It's impossible. They would need 5 years of training, right?
Mhm.
That's what you use the software for, to automate the process. Then every defense expert's now going to say, well, you don't know the science behind it. Do you know if it has any flaws? Well, I don't know. Well, Judge, I'm not going to trust this software tool anymore, because we've seen a case, Koberger case, has 10,000 tickets showing there's flaws in the software. We
Mhm.
want to throw the results out. You see what this can do?
Mhm.
This looks great on the front end as a PR strategy, kind of.
And it could
And
potentially
I
have
hope it's
really
not just that.
negligent ricocheting impact.
It can be a long-standing impact on future cases. So I always say, for a software company, you build software, stay in the lane of software.
That's right.
Don't start dipping out into other stuff. When you start dipping into even competing with your own base, finding a home for cops that leave the force and now all of a sudden they want to join your consulting team. One screw up, one guy gets arrested on your team. The PR fallout from that is impactful, right?
Just know your role.
That's where I'm at. It's like, and I know they're great experts, right? And they can testify very competently. I know that, and I would have nothing wrong probably with anything they say. It's probably truth and gospel because they've always operated that way. Both of them have, but it's not that. It's everything else they're going to dig into the company, and it's going to happen. And we're all going to see what happens out of that, and it'll be interesting. But I think, these gaps. Just because there's a gap doesn't mean anything. You got to say why.
I agree.
Why? The famous question, why? We always like, why'd that happen?
Yeah.
I
agree.
Talk about stuff all day long. My question here in the office is, prove it to me. Show me.
Show me something. Yep.
That's it. Show me
something.
something.
Show me better than you can tell me. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we can all talk about it. When you show me the ones and zeros, show me what happened. Show me the data. Prove it up.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all of your time. I really, really, really appreciate it. And I know that my subscribers will appreciate it as well. They've been asking for quite a while for me to see if I could re-interview you. But then the interview with the Drunk Turkey Show, they're like, come on, you got to try one more time. So when you offered, I was like, oh, I guess I'll take it because I know my fans and I have actually wanted to see if we could dig in with some of the new information. So thank you so much.
You're gonna think I'm crazy, but I actually don't watch any law and crime stuff. Like nothing.
No?
So like no podcast, nothing. Like we do it all day, every day. Like we don't watch stuff because then we're always afraid like we'll be doing a case and we're hearing about
and you'll
it
have heard something
like
that you should.
We just stay with all of it. So sometimes people they message me and I'm like, I have no idea who these people are. Somebody else is in the office. It's like an admin goes, they're really famous. And I go, really? I don't know that. Like, it's just not my world. But no, I mean, when we get the call from like 48 Hours Inside Edition or something like that, we do those quite often. And we just did one of 48 Hours in January, big expose with them. But so I haven't watched any of the TV shows or anything or any of the Netflix stuff on any of this stuff. But I appreciate you having me on. I just know that some of this is pretty fascinating, some of the technical components of all this and how this comes out. And I think everybody at least gets a fond appreciation now that it isn't just print a report and run to court, right? There's a lot more science that happens to figure these things out. And if everybody does their due diligence, justice is served. That's it.
And that's what we're hoping for here.
I appreciate you.
Thank
you have a great day, okay?
Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.